The ocean covering what is now Kansas was once filled with predators that no longer have a modern equivalent. A 6-meter shark could disappear beneath the surface there and become prey, not to something larger, to something stranger. Marine reptiles moved through this inland sea with jaws designed so that once prey entered the mouth, there was no escape direction left, and this was not the worst ocean Earth ever produced. There were periods when the sea itself became hostile to life. Oxygen vanished from the water. Toxic gases spread upward from the deep. Nearly all marine species disappeared. Other eras produced predators so efficient that modern apex hunters would barely survive beside them. A heavily armored fish evolved jaws that opened faster than the human brain can consciously react. More than 500 million years ago, before fish had even evolved jaws, something with 16,000 lenses in each eye was already hunting through the sea. The prehistoric ocean was not one world. It was a sequence of different oceans, each with its own rules, its own predators, and its own extinction events. In this video, we descend through 500 million years of vanished seas to understand why prehistoric oceans became some of the most dangerous environments life has ever endured. Long before forests spread across continents, or animals learned to walk beneath open sky, the planet already belonged to the sea. Continents existed only as scattered masses of volcanic stone, surrounded by immense water that stretched uninterrupted beyond every horizon. For most of Earth's history, nearly every struggle for survival, every evolutionary experiment, every extinction, and every brief triumph unfolded beneath the surface of an ocean that was never still for very long. The water covering the planet tonight feels ancient because it is. In one form or another, it has carried life for almost the entire duration of complex existence itself. Yet the prehistoric ocean was not a single place preserved through time. It changed constantly, sometimes so slowly that entire mountain ranges rose and vanished before the transformation became visible, and sometimes with startling violence. The chemistry of seawater shifted repeatedly across millions of years. Oxygen levels climbed and collapsed. Temperatures warmed until tropical conditions reached the poles, then cooled again beneath expanding ice. Salinity drifted upward and downward as coastlines flooded and retreated. Deep currents altered direction. Entire inland seas appeared where dry plains now exist, only to disappear back into stone long before humans would ever give them names. Even the shape of the ocean floor itself refused permanence. Beneath the Pacific tonight, tectonic plates continue moving only centimeters each year, though over immense spans of time, those movements become enough to tear continents apart and build entirely new oceans in their place. The sea that once covered what is now the American Midwest during the late Cretaceous no longer exists anywhere on Earth. Its floor was lifted upward, drained, folded into rock, and eventually transformed into farmland beneath open wind and grass. Every ocean in this story belongs to a different arrangement of the planet, almost like separate worlds sharing the same sphere across different ages. Deep time makes these worlds difficult to hold in the mind all at once. 500 million years is not merely distant, it is so vast that recorded human history occupies only a thin surface layer against it, almost invisible when compressed into geological scale. Creatures separated by tens of millions of years never encountered one another, despite often being grouped together in modern imagination. The radiodonts of the Cambrian lived in oceans utterly alien to the reptile-dominated seas of the Jurassic, and those Jurassic waters themselves would have seemed impossibly ancient to the whales of the Miocene. Each era carried its own atmosphere, currents, predators, prey, and rules for survival. The ocean also permitted size in a way land never could. Water carried weight that gravity would otherwise crush beneath its own mass, freed from many of the physical limits imposed on terrestrial life. Marine animals expanded into proportions that still feel improbable even in fossil form. Bodies grew longer, skulls heavier, jaws wider, and muscles denser because seawater itself helped support the burden. The largest creatures that have ever existed, from ancient reptiles to modern blue whales, all emerged from this same physical advantage granted by buoyancy and depth. Across these oceans, evolution unfolded less like peaceful adaptation and more like escalation. Every improvement introduced pressure for another. When predators evolved sharper vision, prey evolved armor or camouflage. When jaws became stronger, shells thickened, speed produced counterspeed, venom produced resistance, echolocation emerged in darkness, and silence became a survival strategy against it. Over hundreds of millions of years, this endless exchange reshaped marine life into forms that now appear almost excessive, though each adaptation belonged perfectly to the world that produced it. From the Cambrian shallows to the Miocene hunting grounds, every ocean in this journey became an arena where survival continuously sharpened itself against extinction. For a long stretch of Earth's early history, the seafloor remained slow and strangely uneventful. Vast carpets of microbial mats spread across shallow marine sediment beneath dim water, where almost nothing chased anything else. Soft-bodied organisms drifted or rested in place, absorbing nutrients from the surrounding sea with little resistance and little urgency. Survival depended less on speed or awareness than simple endurance. Then, around 541 million years ago, the rhythm changed with startling suddenness. In geological terms, it happened almost overnight. The Cambrian Ocean became crowded with movement. Bodies hardened, mouths appeared, fins, spines, grasping limbs, segmented shells, and sensory organs emerged across the sea in a burst of evolutionary experimentation unlike anything before or since. The quiet microbial plains of earlier oceans gave way to a living environment dense with interaction, collision, and pursuit. Paleontologists would later call this transition the Cambrian explosion, though the word explosion only approximates the scale of transformation unfolding beneath those shallow tropical waters. One innovation altered the balance more profoundly than any other. Eyes appeared. Before the Cambrian, there is no evidence that animals possessed true image-forming vision. Life existed largely in darkness of another kind, guided by chemistry, vibration, and simple awareness of light itself. Then, within perhaps 20 million years, multiple lineages evolved increasingly sophisticated visual systems almost simultaneously. The ocean became a place where one creature could suddenly detect another at distance, track movement, recognize shape, and react before contact occurred. Predation changed from accidental encounter into deliberate pursuit. A theory proposed by paleontologist Andrew Parker later described this transformation as the light switch theory. Once the first predators developed effective eyes, every surrounding organism faced a new evolutionary pressure. Visibility itself became dangerous. Creatures that could not hide, armor themselves, burrow, swim away, or evolve their own visual systems quickly disappeared from the environment. Vision spread through the Cambrian Sea, not gradually, but with the relentless pace of an escalating biological contest. At the time, most of the planet's continents clustered near the equator. Warm, shallow water extended across enormous portions of Earth beneath long bands of tropical sunlight. There were few deep-rooted plants on land, no forests, and almost no life beyond the shoreline. The center of biological complexity remained entirely marine, concentrated in broad continental shelves, where sunlight reached the seafloor and nutrients circulated easily through the water column. Among the most successful inhabitants of this world were the trilobites. Their bodies were divided into articulated segments protected by mineralized exoskeletons, and many species possessed some of the earliest true compound eyes ever evolved. These eyes were built from calcite lenses, a crystalline material harder than bone, arranged into intricate visual arrays capable in some species of detecting movement across nearly every direction at once. Trilobites spread through Cambrian seas in unimaginable numbers, crawling across sediment, scavenging, feeding, reproducing, and becoming one of the foundational prey animals of the age. Around them moved creatures so anatomically unfamiliar that even modern science struggled for decades to understand them correctly. Hallucigenia emerged from the seafloor on thin stilt-like limbs beneath rows of sharp dorsal spines, reconstructed backwards by early researchers because no living analog existed to guide interpretation. Opabinia drifted through the water with 5 eyes arranged across its head and a flexible nozzle-like appendage extending forward to gather food. Wiwaxia carried overlapping armor plates and long defensive spines across its soft body, resembling no modern animal cleanly enough to fit comfortably into existing categories of life. Much of this vanished ecosystem survives today because of a remarkable formation in what is now British Columbia, Canada. The Burgess Shale preserved these animals beneath layers of fine marine sediment so rapidly and completely that even delicate tissues endured through deep time. Muscle fibers, digestive tracts, and traces of soft anatomy remain sealed within stone for more than 500 million years, holding the memory of a world where vision first entered the ocean and transformed survival forever. Across the Cambrian seafloor, trilobites moved in vast living currents, their mineral eyes reflecting pale tropical light through shallow water. For many of them, danger arrived before contact, not as vibration or shadow, but as something approaching with intention. A shape emerged from the water column above, flexible and segmented, moving with a smoothness unfamiliar to the heavily armored creatures below. It did not crawl across sediment or wait hidden within it. It swam openly, steering itself through the sea with precise control, already adapted to a world where seeing and being seen had become inseparable from survival. This animal would later be named Anomalocaris canadensis, though for decades nobody understood what it actually was. Early fossil discoveries seemed too strange to belong to a single creature. Its circular mouth was first catalogued as a jellyfish. Its grasping appendages were described separately as shrimp-like animals. Portions of its body were mistaken for sea cucumbers, lying flattened in stone. Only in the early 1980s did paleontologists Harry Whittington and Derek Briggs finally reconstruct the fragments together, revealing not several organisms, but one coherent predator unlike anything alive in the modern ocean. At roughly 1 meter long, Anomalocaris was immense by Cambrian standards, larger than nearly every surrounding animal in its ecosystem. Yet size alone did not make it dominant. Much of its success appears to have depended on vision. Fossilized eye specimens later discovered in South Australia and described in a Nature paper published in 2011 revealed compound eyes containing as many as 16,700 individual lenses each, among the most sophisticated visual systems ever documented in the fossil record. Each eye measured up to 3 centimeters long, proportionally enormous for an animal of its body size, suggesting that the sea around it was interpreted through detail and movement rather than blind contact. The body of Anomalocaris moved through water, using a long row of lateral swimming lobes undulating in coordinated sequence down its sides. Combined with a broad tail fan at the rear, this motion allowed remarkable maneuverability without the rigid mechanical strokes used by many later marine animals. It drifted, accelerated, turned, and adjusted depth with little disturbance to the surrounding water. In the soft tropical seas of the Cambrian, it likely approached prey almost silently. At the front of its body extended two flexible appendages lined with curved spines. These limbs folded inward with controlled force, pinning prey against the mouth beneath. Fossilized trilobites have been found bearing injuries and puncture marks consistent with attacks from Anomalocaris, evidence preserved across more than 500 million years of stone. The mouth itself possessed no jaws in the vertebrate sense. Instead, hardened plates formed a circular structure resembling a rotating disc, capable of flexing inward to crush and process prey whole. The mechanism functioned less like biting and more like grinding, pulling food inward through overlapping rows of reinforced tissue. Yet even Anomalocaris represented only one branch of a larger evolutionary dynasty. The radiodonts, the group to which it belonged, diversified into multiple forms, occupying different ecological roles throughout Cambrian seas. Some became giant sediment grazers, moving slowly across the seafloor. Others evolved filtering structures capable of harvesting microscopic organisms directly from the water column. Megalodon fed through delicate comb-like appendages designed for suspension feeding, while Titanochores developed a broad body adapted for disturbing sediment and scraping food from marine surfaces. Together, they suggest an ocean already structured around radiodont dominance, with entire ecosystems arranged beneath their presence at the top of the food web. Anomalocaris itself persisted for roughly 30 million years, an almost immeasurable duration when placed beside human existence. Entire mountain chains have risen and worn away in less time. Across those millions of years, generation after generation crossed the same warm Cambrian waters beneath tropical sunlight, hunting through a marine world still experimenting with the possibilities of complex life, where vision had only recently entered the ocean and already changed it permanently. The Ordovician Sea expanded quietly across the planet, filling low continental margins with warm water that spread farther inland than at almost any previous point in Earth's history. Ancient glaciers retreated, coastlines dissolved beneath rising tides, and broad, shallow shelves formed around drifting continents where sunlight penetrated easily into the upper layers of the ocean. Life moved into these flooded regions with extraordinary speed. What had once been sparse became crowded. What had once been experimental became structured into vast ecological systems layered from the seafloor upward. The ocean floor itself changed appearance during this time. Colonies of early reef builders spread through the shallows, creating long ridges and clustered habitats where countless organisms gathered for shelter and food. These reefs were not built by the same coral families familiar to modern seas, but by ancient tabulate and rugose corals, whose limestone skeletons accumulated gradually over immense spans of time across what are now parts of North America, Europe, and China. Remnants of those vanished reefs still survive as pale cliff faces and folded stone beds lifted high above present coastlines. Around these reefs drifted one of the richest marine ecosystems the planet had yet produced. Echinoderms spread in remarkable diversity across the seabed, their bodies branching into forms that no longer exist in the modern ocean. Brachiopods clustered densely in the sediment like living shells attached to the sea itself. Graptolites floated through the water column in delicate colonial chains, suspended in the currents far from shore. Everywhere, ecological niches multiplied, predators specialized, prey diversified. The Ordovician Ocean no longer resembled the comparatively simple food webs of the Cambrian. It had become layered, interconnected, and increasingly competitive. Fish existed within this world, but only at its edges. Most remained small, jawless, and heavily armored, drifting through environments dominated by very different rulers. The true giants of the Ordovician belonged to the mollusks, specifically the orthocone nautiloids, cephalopods, whose long straight shells moved through the water like enormous living spears. Some species, including Endocerus and Camaracerus, reached lengths of 11 meters, making them the largest known animals on Earth during their time. Their shells tapered gradually backward through a series of internal chambers filled with gas and fluid, allowing buoyancy to be controlled with delicate precision. Beneath the shell extended a cluster of tentacles surrounding a hard beak-like mouth, while at the opposite end, muscular siphons expelled water in concentrated bursts that propelled the animal silently through the sea. These predators often hunted from below. In the filtered green light of Ordovician waters, they could remain nearly invisible beneath schools of trilobites or other seafloor animals before accelerating upward with startling speed. Their eyes, already highly developed compared to earlier marine hunters, tracked movement across long distances in open water. Tentacles closed around prey, while the powerful beak tore through armor and soft tissue alike. Trilobites continued to flourish throughout the Ordovician, diversifying into more than 1,500 known species, occupying nearly every marine habitat available. Some burrowed into sediment while others swam freely above the seafloor or scavenged along reef systems. Yet despite their abundance and adaptability, many became prey for the orthocones. Fossilized gut contents preserved inside ancient cephalopod shells contain fragmented trilobite remains, quiet evidence of encounters repeated countless times beneath vanished seas. For millions of years, the Ordovician Ocean deepened in complexity and biological richness. Then the climate shifted again. Far to the south, the immense supercontinent Gondwana drifted gradually across the South Pole, allowing ice sheets to expand over continental landmasses on a scale not seen for ages. Water that had flooded shallow marine habitats became locked within growing glaciers. Global sea levels fell. Coastal ecosystems collapsed as the continental shelves emptied and retreated. The extinction unfolded in two major pulses near the end of the Ordovician, removing approximately 85% of marine species from the planet. Entire reef systems disappeared. Countless trilobite lineages vanished. Many orthocone predators were lost with them. The warm, flooded seas that had once supported such abundance withdrew into colder and narrower oceans, carrying much of the Ordovician world away beneath silence, ice, and stone. Ice withdrew slowly from the edges of the ancient continents, and the ocean returned behind it. Over millions of years, flooded coastlines widened again beneath warmer climates, filling with survivors that had endured the collapse at the end of the Ordovician. The recovery did not happen all at once. Ecosystems spread gradually across shallow marine shelves, rebuilding themselves from scattered lineages that had passed through the extinction bottleneck. Yet, as life returned, the structure of the sea began changing in ways the earlier oceans had never seen before. Among the most important developments of the Silurian period was the appearance of jawed fish. Earlier vertebrates had possessed only soft mouths or rigid armored openings poorly suited for active predation. Now, for the first time, vertebrates evolved true biting structures capable of gripping, tearing, and processing prey with controlled force. It was a quiet anatomical revolution that rewired marine food webs from the inside outward. Fish no longer existed merely as drifting scavengers or filter feeders. They became participants in the escalating contest of pursuit and defense, already reshaping the prehistoric ocean. Even so, the dominant predators of the Silurian were not fish at all. They belonged to a different lineage entirely, one far older than vertebrates and far stranger in form. Across coastal lagoons, estuaries, inland seas, and shallow marine basins, the rulers of the water were eurypterids, the creatures later nicknamed sea scorpions. These arthropods belonged to the broader chelicerate group, distant relatives of modern horseshoe crabs and terrestrial scorpions. Their bodies were divided into hardened segments, protected by armor-like exoskeletons, with broad paddles for swimming and grasping appendages extending from the front of the body. Some moved slowly along the seafloor, while others became active pursuit predators capable of surprising speed in open water. One of the earliest known forms, Pentacopterus, had already appeared before the Silurian fully began, reaching lengths of roughly 1.7 meters. Its body resembled a flattened biological vessel, broad at the center and tapering toward the rear, with paddle-like limbs driving it through shallow water, while clawed appendages searched ahead. Fossils discovered in ancient marine sediments show a predator already specialized for a dynamic coastal environment where hunting depended on maneuverability as much as strength. As the Silurian progressed, eurypterids diversified into dozens of species, occupying nearly every available marine niche. Some preferred calm estuaries, where fresh water mixed with salt. Others roamed shallow inland seas or sheltered reef systems. A few developed the ability to survive brief periods beyond the water itself, dragging their armored bodies across wet mud flats beneath humid coastal air. These movements were awkward and temporary, but they marked one of the earliest known experiments with leaving the sea behind, long before vertebrates would fully attempt the same transition. Among the largest Silurian hunters was Pterygotus, a giant sea scorpion exceeding 1.5 meters in length. It possessed enormous forward-facing chelicerae, grasping claws adapted for seizing fish directly from the water column. Behind them, broad swimming paddles and a muscular tail allowed sudden bursts of acceleration through shallow marine environments. Early jawed fish now shared the water with predators specifically adapted to capture them. The contest intensified as both groups evolved together. Fish became faster, developing improved fins, stronger muscles, and more flexible body plans capable of sharper turns and rapid escape. In response, many eurypterids grew larger and more heavily armored, their limbs and claws expanding into increasingly formidable structures. This escalation reached its most extreme form slightly later, in the early Devonian, with Jaekelopterus rhenanii, the largest arthropod known to have existed. Estimates place its body length between 2.3 and 2.6 meters, though its full size, including frontal appendages, may have exceeded 3 meters. A fossilized claw fragment, measuring 46 centimeters, described in a 2007 study from the University of Bristol, hints at the scale of these animals moving through ancient coastal waters. For millions of years, eurypterids remained among the dominant predators of the prehistoric sea, their rise shaped by the same evolutionary pressure already echoing across earlier oceans. Each improvement in one lineage forced adaptation in another, and the Silurian water carried that exchange forward in silence beneath the returning warmth of the recovering world. Across the early Devonian Sea, movement became faster than it had ever been before. Bodies narrowed into more efficient shapes, fins stiffened and widened for control, tails generated stronger thrust through open water, and jaws closed with deliberate force instead of passive contact. The ancient oceans that had once belonged primarily to arthropods and cephalopods now entered a different age entirely, one shaped increasingly by vertebrates learning how to dominate three-dimensional space. The Devonian period began around 419 million years ago, and over the tens of millions of years that followed, fish diversified with extraordinary speed into nearly every ecological role available. Some filtered microscopic organisms from the water column. Others grazed along the seafloor or hunted in schools through shallow lagoons. Certain lineages adapted to rivers and estuaries, while others moved outward into open marine environments far from land. It became such a defining feature of the era that later paleontologists would refer to the Devonian simply as the Age of Fish. Among the most successful groups were the placoderms, heavily armored vertebrates whose heads and forward bodies were protected by thick plates of dermal bone joined together like interlocking shields. Unlike earlier jawless fish, placoderms possessed true biting jaws capable of gripping prey with controlled power. This single anatomical innovation altered the balance of marine predation permanently. Vertebrates no longer relied on suction or passive feeding alone. They could now seize, crush, tear, and compete directly with the dominant predators surrounding them. For nearly 60 million years, placoderms spread through Devonian seas in remarkable diversity. Some species remained relatively small, navigating reefs and coastal shallows, while others grew into enormous open-water animals occupying positions near the very top of the food web. Their success reshaped marine ecosystems across much of the planet. One of the strangest among them was Titanichthys, a giant placoderm estimated to reach lengths of roughly 8 meters. Despite its immense size, it appears to have lived not as an active predator, but as a filter feeder, drifting slowly through productive tropical waters with its jaws open wide. Rather than crushing prey, its mouth likely strained enormous volumes of plankton from the water column in a manner loosely resembling modern whale sharks or baleen whales. Even in the Devonian, the ocean was already experimenting with gigantism through multiple ecological strategies at once. The seas themselves encouraged this abundance. Much of what is now North America, Europe, and Australia lay beneath broad epicontinental seas, shallow marine basins flooded by warm water extending far across continental interiors. Sunlight penetrated easily into these regions, supporting dense biological productivity from microscopic plankton upward through increasingly complex food chains. Reef systems flourished. Armored fish patrolled open channels between submerged coastlines. Eurypterids still persisted in certain environments, though the balance of power had begun shifting steadily toward vertebrates. Early sharks also appeared during this period. Compared to the heavily plated placoderms surrounding them, these first sharks were relatively small and lightly built, their skeletons composed primarily of cartilage rather than bone. They moved with greater flexibility than many contemporaries, capable of rapid acceleration and agile turns through crowded marine habitats. In another age, they might have dominated immediately. Instead, they entered oceans already occupied by predators of astonishing scale and power. Some Devonian sharks were likely hunted themselves. Fossil evidence suggests that large placoderms preyed upon smaller vertebrates, including early sharks sharing the same waters. The emerging shark body plan possessed many advantages that would later allow its descendants to survive for hundreds of millions of years, but during the Devonian, it remained only one competitor among many inside ecosystems still controlled by larger and more heavily armed hunters. As fish diversified, the evolutionary pressure shaping the ocean intensified once again. Armor thickened, jaws strengthened, speed produced counterspeed. The Devonian Sea became increasingly crowded with predators capable of pursuing prey actively through open water, and within that growing contest, one lineage of placoderm was beginning to separate itself from all others. Its body carried the culmination of millions of years of escalating predation pressure, forming one of the most formidable vertebrate hunters the planet had yet produced beneath the warm currents of the Devonian world. Far from the seafloor, beyond the crowded reefs and drifting shoals of smaller fish, the open Devonian Ocean had begun to develop a new kind of predator. Earlier, marine hunters often depended on ambush from sediment, sudden upward strikes from below, or the protection of coastal environments rich with cover. This animal abandoned those boundaries entirely. It moved through open water with the confidence of something large enough that few creatures could threaten it, crossing warm inland seas that stretched across much of the ancient world. Its name was Dunkleosteus terrelli. Between roughly 382 and 358 million years ago, this placoderm became one of the most formidable predators Earth had yet produced. Modern estimates place its body length at up to 6 meters, with a weight exceeding 1 ton, though the scale of the animal becomes easier to understand through its skull alone. Mounted fossil specimens displayed at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History possess cranial armor broad enough to resemble heavy industrial machinery more than the remains of a fish. The head formed a dense forward shield of articulated bone designed not only for protection but for delivering extraordinary force. Unlike sharks or later reptiles, Dunkleosteus possessed no true teeth. Instead, the edges of its jaws formed sharpened plates of dermal bone that continuously ground against one another during feeding. With every bite, the surfaces honed themselves further, producing blade-like edges capable of slicing through armor, flesh, and bone with startling efficiency. The mechanism resembled a pair of self-sharpening shears built directly into the skull. When the jaws closed, they did not merely puncture prey, they cut through it. Biomechanical studies of reconstructed skull musculature suggest a bite force of approximately 7,400 newtons at the jaw tip, equivalent to pressures approaching 8,000 pounds per square inch. Among fish, no known animal has surpassed it. The force falls into the same general range as some of the largest terrestrial predators that would evolve hundreds of millions of years later, including Tyrannosaurus rex and modern crocodilians. Yet, the power of Dunkleosteus depended not only on strength, but on speed. Its jaws could open in approximately 20 milliseconds, far faster than most prey could react. The rapid expansion created intense suction that pulled nearby animals directly inward before the bony blades snapped shut. In the water, this mechanism transformed the mouth into both trap and weapon simultaneously. Small fish, armored vertebrates, and other marine animals could be engulfed before escape responses even fully registered through their nervous systems. Fossil evidence suggests that Dunkleosteus fed opportunistically on nearly anything it could overpower. Remains attributed to the species include bite marks matching the geometry of its own jaws, indicating that individuals attacked and consumed one another when circumstances allowed. In the crowded Devonian Sea, even the dominant predator remained vulnerable to others of its kind. Cannibalism appears to have been woven directly into the ecology of these ancient waters. The body behind the skull was comparatively streamlined, lacking the heavy armor extending across the entire frame seen in earlier placoderms. This balance between protection and mobility allowed Dunkleosteus to operate effectively in pelagic environments far from the seabed. It did not lurk within reefs or crawl along sediment. It hunted in open water, occupying a role later echoed by large sharks, predatory whales, and other marine superpredators that evolved long after the Devonian ended. In many ways, Dunkleosteus established the first clear blueprint for the apex vertebrate hunter of the open ocean. Large body size, rapid acceleration, powerful jaws, forward dominance within the food web, and long-range movement through pelagic waters all appeared together within a single animal for the first time. Subsequent oceans would recreate variations of this design repeatedly across entirely different lineages, as though the sea itself had discovered a particularly effective solution and continued refining it through deep time. For millions of years, Dunkleosteus crossed the warm Devonian seas beneath drifting continental shelves and tropical sunlight, carrying within its armored skull the culmination of an evolutionary escalation that had begun hundreds of millions of years earlier in the first sighted waters of the Cambrian world. The Devonian Ocean reached its height beneath warm skies and shallow continental seas crowded with vertebrate life. Yet the forces preparing its collapse began far from the water. Along riverbanks and floodplains, the first true forests spread gradually across the continents. Primitive trees extended deeper root systems into stone and sediment than any earlier plants had managed before. Over immense stretches of time, those roots fractured rock apart, grain by grain, releasing minerals and nutrients that rainfall carried downstream toward the sea. What appeared on land as quiet biological expansion slowly altered the chemistry of the entire planet. Phosphorus and other nutrients accumulated within rivers, emptying into shallow marine basins. Coastal waters became increasingly fertile, feeding enormous blooms of algae spreading across sunlit surfaces in dense drifting layers. At first, productivity surged. Marine ecosystems, already rich with fish and invertebrates, found themselves surrounded by even greater abundance. Yet the blooms carried a hidden consequence that unfolded beneath the surface. When vast quantities of algae died, they sank downward through the water column and began decomposing. Bacteria feeding on this organic matter consumed dissolved oxygen during the process, drawing it steadily out of surrounding seawater. In isolated pockets, the effect remained temporary, but across the Devonian Ocean, the blooms became so extensive that oxygen depletion spread outward into entire marine regions. Layers of anoxic water, places where oxygen vanished almost completely, expanded upward from deeper basins into the shallower environments where most marine life lived. The sea itself began suffocating its inhabitants. Creatures adapted for millions of years to active predation and constant movement suddenly faced an entirely different threat, one with no visible body and no instinctive defense. Gills passed water that no longer contained enough oxygen to sustain complex metabolism. Reef communities weakened first, then collapsed in widening chains of ecological failure. Fish died within waters that still appeared outwardly calm. Large predators disappeared beside the prey they once hunted. The very medium sustaining marine life became chemically hostile to it. The first major extinction pulse, known as the Kelwasser event, struck around 372 million years ago. It did not erase the Devonian world instantly, but it fractured marine ecosystems on a global scale. Entire groups declined sharply. Reef systems contracted. Biodiversity thinned across the warm epicontinental seas that had supported such extraordinary abundance. Roughly 10 million years later came the Hagenberg event, a second and even more destabilizing collapse. By then, the ocean already carried the scars of prolonged oxygen depletion, but additional forces now entered the system. Global temperatures dropped rapidly. Glaciation expanded across portions of the planet, locking water into growing ice sheets and disrupting marine circulation patterns. Some geological evidence also hints at the possibility of extraterrestrial impact activity during this period, though the full role remains uncertain within the fossil record. Together, these extinction pulses eliminated between 70 and 85% of marine species. The placoderms vanished entirely. Dunkleosteus disappeared from the open ocean alongside Titanichthys and countless other lineages that had dominated Devonian seas for tens of millions of years. The great evolutionary experiment of armored vertebrate supremacy ended not through defeat by a superior predator, but through the destabilization of the environment itself. The collapse reached so deeply into marine ecosystems that reef-building activity required approximately 145 million years to recover to comparable levels of complexity. Entire ecological architectures disappeared from the planet for spans of time longer than the existence of many later animal groups combined. What makes the Devonian extinction especially striking is the source of its destruction. Earlier oceans had been shaped primarily by predation pressure, by the escalating contest between hunter and hunted unfolding across deep time. In the Devonian, life altered the planet strongly enough to destabilize its own environment. Forests growing quietly on land changed river chemistry. River chemistry altered the ocean. The ocean lost oxygen, and the consequences traveled outward through every layer of marine existence. Beneath the surface, the warm seas that had once supported some of the first true vertebrate superpredators settled gradually into emptier waters, carrying forward only the survivors capable of enduring a world where the greatest danger no longer possessed eyes, claws, or jaws at all. The waters left behind after the Devonian collapse were quieter for a time. Reef systems lay broken across shallow continental seas, and many of the great armored vertebrates that had dominated earlier oceans no longer existed anywhere on Earth. Yet, extinction never leaves the sea empty for very long. Across surviving marine environments, smaller lineages endured within scattered refuges, drifting through ecosystems, still recovering from oxygen loss and climatic instability. From those survivors, the Carboniferous Ocean slowly rebuilt itself. One group expanded especially rapidly into the ecological vacancies left behind by the disappearance of the placoderms. Sharks, once relatively minor participants in Devonian food webs, now spread outward into open water, coastal shallows, estuaries, and deeper marine basins. Their skeletons, built from cartilage rather than dense bone, gave them lighter and more flexible bodies than many earlier vertebrate predators. Over time, this design allowed greater efficiency in movement and reduced energetic cost during long periods of swimming. Among the early apex forms emerging from this transition was Barrameda, a carboniferous shark reaching approximately 6 meters in length. Fossil evidence suggests it hunted in extremely shallow water environments, moving through coastal regions where submerged vegetation and narrow channels created crowded marine corridors. Unlike the heavily armored placoderms before it, Barrameda relied less on brute force and more on mobility, directional control, and repeated biting attacks delivered through rows of replaceable teeth. It represented the beginning of a long era in which cartilaginous predators would dominate marine ecosystems across hundreds of millions of years. Around these sharks drifted another lineage that had already persisted through multiple oceanic catastrophes. Ammonites, descendants of earlier cephalopod groups related distantly to the orthocones, diversified spectacularly throughout the Carboniferous and into the Permian. Their spiral shells ranged from forms no larger than a coin to giants approaching 2 meters in diameter. Chambered interiors regulated buoyancy with extraordinary precision, allowing ammonites to occupy nearly every marine habitat imaginable, from shallow reefs to deeper offshore waters. Their success became one of the great constants of prehistoric oceans. Species emerged in staggering numbers, each shell coiling according to patterns so varied that entire geological periods can now be identified through ammonite fossils alone. Some likely drifted passively within ocean currents, while others swam actively using jet propulsion generated through muscular siphons. Across changing climates and shifting continental arrangements, ammonites endured as one of the longest surviving marine animal groups in Earth's history. By the Permian period, beginning around 299 million years ago, the ocean had once again become a deeply layered and biologically complex world. Reef systems recovered gradually across warm, shallow seas. Echinoderms diversified into new ecological roles along the seafloor. Early marine reptiles began appearing in coastal environments, still tentative compared to the fully ocean-adapted giants that would evolve later. Predators and prey occupied increasingly specialized positions within intricate food webs stretching from plankton to apex hunters. Within these ecosystems evolved one of the strangest sharks ever known, Helicoprion. Its anatomy puzzled scientists for more than a century because the animal's teeth formed not conventional rows, but a continuous spiral coil resembling a circular saw embedded within the jaw. Fossils preserving these structures appeared almost impossible to interpret. Early reconstructions placed the tooth whorl in wildly different locations, including the snout and dorsal fin. Only in 2013 did advanced computed tomography scanning finally reveal the arrangement clearly, showing the spiral seated within the lower jaw where new teeth continuously rotated forward as older ones moved inward. The resulting mechanism gave Helicoprion a feeding apparatus unlike anything in the modern ocean. Serrated teeth curved inward through the spiral structure, allowing prey to be gripped and sliced repeatedly during feeding. In the vast Permian seas, evolution was still producing anatomical experiments that seemed almost detached from familiar biological logic. For millions of years, the Carboniferous and Permian oceans rebuilt themselves from Devonian ruin into ecosystems crowded once again with specialized predators, resilient survivors, and expanding marine diversity. Sharks refined body plans that would persist into the present day. Cephalopods flourished across nearly every marine environment. Reef systems regained complexity beneath warm, shallow water. The ocean appeared recovered, stable even, though beneath that apparent stability, the planet was approaching one of the most catastrophic transitions in the entire history of complex life. Around 252 million years ago, the ocean approached a threshold beyond which complex life almost failed entirely. Earlier extinctions had shattered ecosystems, erased dominant predators, and emptied reefs, but the Permian-Triassic collapse unfolded on a scale so severe that the fossil record itself seems to thin into absence. Layer after layer of marine sediment preserves evidence of a world where living diversity narrowed toward silence. Paleontologists sometimes describe what followed as the world after the near death of life, because so little of the previous biosphere remained intact. The catastrophe began far inland within a volcanic province now known as the Siberian Traps. Across immense expanses of what is today northern Russia, eruptions continued not for centuries or millennia, but for approximately 1 million years. Lava flooded across the landscape in repeated pulses, while volcanic gases poured continuously into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide accumulated in enormous quantities alongside sulfur dioxide and other chemically reactive compounds. The sky itself became part of the extinction mechanism. As greenhouse gases intensified, global temperatures climbed steadily upward. Tropical surface waters may have reached temperatures approaching 40 degrees Celsius, conditions intolerable for many forms of complex marine life. Warm water carries less dissolved oxygen than cold water, and the oceans already strained beneath rising heat began losing one of the basic requirements necessary for animal survival. At the same time, the chemistry of seawater shifted rapidly. Carbon dioxide dissolved into the ocean and formed carbonic acid, lowering the pH of marine environments across the planet. Organisms dependent on calcium carbonate for shells, skeletons, or reef structures found the water itself beginning to dissolve the materials from which their bodies were built. Corals weakened. Mollusks struggled to maintain shell growth. Echinoderms lost structural stability. Entire reef ecosystems, assembled slowly across millions of years, deteriorated into collapsing frameworks of mineral debris. Yet the deepest mechanism of destruction unfolded far below the surface, within the circulation systems governing the movement of the global ocean itself. Normally, differences in temperature and salinity drive thermohaline circulation, allowing oxygen-rich surface water to sink gradually into deeper marine layers, while colder water rises in return. During the Permian crisis, this circulation slowed toward stagnation. Without constant mixing, deep water became isolated from atmospheric oxygen. Anoxic conditions spread downward first, then outward through vast marine basins. In those oxygen-depleted depths, sulfate-reducing bacteria flourished. These microorganisms produced hydrogen sulfide as a metabolic byproduct, a gas lethal to nearly all complex organisms. Geological evidence preserved within ancient rock, including biomarkers associated with green sulfur bacteria, indicates that hydrogen sulfide eventually rose upward from the deep ocean into shallower sunlit waters where most marine ecosystems still struggled to survive. The sea became chemically poisonous. Marine animals no longer faced only heat, acidification, or oxygen depletion independently. Each process intensified the others. Warm water reduced oxygen availability. Stagnant circulation prevented replenishment. Acidification destabilized biological structures. Toxic gas spread through increasingly anoxic marine layers. Together, these forces created what modern paleontologists sometimes describe as a kill mechanism cascade, a systemic breakdown in which nearly every environmental condition sustaining complex life deteriorated simultaneously. Approximately 96% of marine species disappeared. Around 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species vanished alongside them. Entire evolutionary lineages ended completely. Reef ecosystems collapsed so thoroughly that complex benthic communities remained sparse for millions of years afterward. In the early Triassic fossil record, long intervals appear where reefs are absent, seafloor ecosystems remain minimal, and biodiversity stays strikingly low across marine sediments worldwide. Recovery from the Great Dying became the slowest known biological rebound in Earth's history. For roughly 5 to 10 million years, many regions of the ocean remained comparatively empty, populated mainly by small, opportunistic survivors, capable of tolerating unstable and oxygen-poor conditions. The vibrant complexity of the late Permian Sea did not return quickly. It lingered in fragments, scattered through damaged ecosystems beneath overheated water, still carrying the chemical memory of catastrophe. In earlier oceans, predators dominated the story of extinction. During the Great Dying, predation almost ceased to matter. The ocean itself became the apex force, transforming from habitat into mechanism and reducing the largest marine ecosystem Earth had ever produced into a thin and struggling remnant drifting through poisoned seas. In the aftermath of the Great Dying, the ocean entered one of the strangest intervals in its history. Marine sediments from the earliest Triassic preserve long stretches where reefs are absent, biodiversity remains sparse, and the intricate ecosystems of earlier ages seem to have dissolved almost entirely. Much of the sea was populated by small, opportunistic survivors capable of enduring unstable temperatures, fluctuating oxygen levels, and chemically stressed water. The giant predators and dense food webs of the late Permian had vanished, leaving behind an ocean that felt biologically unfinished. For millions of years, recovery unfolded slowly across this damaged world. Yet, extinction had also emptied ecological space on a scale rarely seen before, and evolution moved quickly to occupy it. Among the most significant newcomers were reptiles, whose distant ancestors had once retreated onto land during the environmental instability of the Permian. Now, some of those lineages began returning to the sea, reversing one of the great transitions in vertebrate history. The earliest stages of this return were awkward. Limbs built for walking still carried bodies through shallow coastal environments where hunting took place near shorelines and river mouths. But over surprisingly short spans of evolutionary time, certain reptiles transformed so completely that they lost nearly all practical connection to land. Their bodies narrowed into streamlined marine forms. Limbs flattened into paddles, tails strengthened for propulsion, reproduction shifted fully into the water itself. These were the ichthyosaurs, often translated as fish lizards, though by the Middle Triassic, many no longer resembled terrestrial reptiles in any obvious way. Their descendants evolved body shapes remarkably similar to modern dolphins and fast pelagic fish, despite sharing no close ancestry with either group. This convergence emerged because the ocean imposes physical constraints that repeatedly favor the same solutions. Efficient movement through open water demands streamlined bodies, narrow profiles, stabilizing fins, and powerful tails. Across entirely separate branches of evolution, the sea continued shaping animals towards similar forms whenever speed and endurance became essential. Ichthyosaurs also abandoned the need to return ashore for reproduction. Fossil evidence preserves individuals carrying embryos within the body cavity, demonstrating that they gave live birth directly in the water. By this point, they had become fully marine animals in every meaningful sense, as specialized for ocean life as whales would later become. Some species grew to astonishing scale. Shonosaurus sicaniensis, discovered in what is now British Columbia, reached lengths of approximately 21 meters, exceeding the size of modern humpback whales and becoming the largest known animal of its time. Its elongated body moved through Triassic seas with slow power beneath water, still recovering from the greatest extinction in Earth's history. The rise of such enormous marine reptiles, only a relatively short geological interval after the near collapse of complex life, demonstrates how quickly evolutionary systems can expand once ecological vacancies appear. The Triassic Ocean also produced nothosaurs, semi-aquatic reptiles occupying an intermediate stage between land and sea. Unlike the fully marine ichthyosaurs, nothosaurs retained the ability to move across land for limited periods, though their bodies increasingly specialized for shallow water hunting. Long necks, flexible limbs, and narrow jaws allowed them to pursue fish through coastal environments where lagoons and inland seas spread beneath the warm Triassic climate. Alongside them appeared the earliest plesiosaurs. At first, they remained relatively modest in size compared to the giant marine reptiles that would later dominate Jurassic and Cretaceous oceans, but the foundations of their body plan had already emerged. Broad torsos, elongated necks, and 4 powerful flippers allowed controlled movement through open water, unlike anything that had existed before. Over millions of years, the Triassic Sea transformed from a depleted post-extinction remnant into a complex marine world populated once again by specialized predators, giant vertebrates, and expanding ecosystems. Yet beneath this recovery, the planet remained geologically unstable. Around 201 million years ago, another immense phase of volcanic activity erupted across what is now associated with the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. Lava, carbon dioxide, and atmospheric disruption spread across the planet once again, and the Triassic Ocean entered another extinction boundary, where established predator hierarchies fractured and reorganized beneath darkening skies and changing seas. Sunlight moved differently through the Jurassic Ocean. Vast inland seas spread across continental interiors, softening coastlines into warm, shallow expanses where water stretched over regions that are now forests, mountains, and farmland. Across much of Europe, rising sea levels flooded low-lying terrain and formed the epicontinental Jurassic Sea, a broad marine world rich with suspended nutrients and constant biological movement. While enormous dinosaurs crossed the land beyond these shores, the water carried ecosystems whose complexity and predatory intensity may have exceeded anything living above the surface. The Jurassic seafloor supported extraordinary abundance. Ammonites drifted through the water in hundreds of forms, their coiled shells varying from delicate spirals no larger than a hand to heavy chambered structures broad enough to dominate entire reef systems. Belemnites moved among them like ancient squid, their torpedo-shaped bodies flashing through open water in schools pursued by larger predators. Fish diversified into increasingly specialized forms, while early marine turtles glided above sponge-built reefs that replaced many earlier coral structures lost during previous extinctions. Within these ecosystems, ichthyosaurs remained among the dominant marine vertebrates. Their bodies had become highly refined for speed and endurance in open water, shaped almost perfectly by the physical demands of life in the sea. Some species hunted near the surface, while others descended into deeper regions where sunlight weakened into dim blue gradients. Among the most specialized was Ophthalmosaurus, an ichthyosaur whose eyes reached approximately 23 centimeters in diameter relative to its body size, among the largest visual organs known in any vertebrate. Those enormous eyes allowed hunting in low-light conditions, far beneath the upper ocean. Reinforced rings of bone surrounding the eye sockets stabilized the organs against pressure changes during deep dives, much as certain modern marine mammals possess adaptations for descending into darkness. In Jurassic waters, vision remained one of the defining tools of survival, refined continuously across hundreds of millions of years since the first predators learned to track movement through Cambrian seas. Plesiosaurs also flourished during this period, though they separated into 2 dramatically different ecological forms. Long-necked plesiosaurs evolved slender bodies and extended cervical regions, capable of reaching extraordinary lengths. Elasmosaurus, one of the most extreme examples, possessed approximately 76 vertebrae within its neck alone, more than any other known animal. Rather than relying on brute force, these reptiles appear to have used reach and precision, extending small heads through schools of fish while keeping the larger body farther away to avoid startling prey. At the same time, another branch of the plesiosaur lineage moved toward power instead of stealth. The pliosaurs developed shorter necks, massive skulls, and muscular bodies built for pursuit predation. Their jaws widened into crushing weapons, lined with heavy conical teeth capable of gripping large, struggling prey. 4 powerful flippers drove them through the water with controlled acceleration, allowing rapid changes in direction despite their enormous size. The Jurassic Ocean therefore became layered with multiple levels of predation operating simultaneously. Small fish consumed plankton, drifting through warm currents. Larger fish hunted those smaller species through reefs and open channels. Ichthyosaurs and long-necked plesiosaurs preyed upon the larger fish and cephalopods occupying midwater ecosystems. Above them moved the pliosaurs, predators large enough to attack ichthyosaurs, marine reptiles, and nearly anything else sharing their environment. As far as the fossil record currently reveals, nothing consistently preyed upon the largest pliosaurs themselves. They occupied the uppermost tier of the Jurassic marine food web, apex hunters moving through warm inland seas with little biological opposition. Their dominance emerged not from a single adaptation, but from the cumulative escalation of marine evolution stretching back across earlier extinctions and recoveries. Every vanished ecosystem had left behind evolutionary pressure, and the Jurassic Ocean gathered those pressures together into one of the most densely predatory marine environments Earth had yet produced. Beneath the surface of those flooded continental seas, life moved constantly through layered currents of pursuit and escape, each organism occupying a precise position within an immense biological structure that extended from drifting plankton to the enormous reptilian predators patrolling the upper limits of Jurassic survival. Long before the Arctic carried ice, the seafloor beneath what is now Svalbard rested under warm Jurassic water rich with ammonites, fish, and marine reptiles. Sediment drifted downward through that ancient sea for millions of years, slowly burying the remains of creatures that disappeared before flowering plants had even spread across the continents. Then, in 2009, paleontologists excavating those exposed Arctic cliffs uncovered fragments of bone so immense that the research team initially struggled to accept they belonged to a single animal. The fossils emerged piece by piece from rock approximately 147 million years old, massive vertebrae, portions of a skull, teeth unlike anything expected from an ordinary marine reptile. As the remains accumulated, the proportions became increasingly difficult to reconcile with known Jurassic predators. The animal was eventually identified as Pliosaurus funkei, later nicknamed Predator X, by the excavation team, a name reflecting less scientific classification than simple disbelief at the scale of the creature they were reconstructing. Estimated body lengths ranged from roughly 10 to 13 meters, though uncertainties remain because the skeleton was incomplete. Weight estimates approached 45 tons, placing the animal among the heaviest marine predators known from the Jurassic world. Its skull alone stretched close to 2 meters in length, a structure built not for delicate feeding but overwhelming mechanical force. Biomechanical modeling, based on preserved cranial material, suggested bite forces potentially reaching approximately 33,000 pounds per square inch, figures that may represent the highest bite pressure calculated for any known animal. Researchers remain cautious because incomplete skull reconstruction introduces unavoidable uncertainty. Yet even conservative estimates place Pliosaurus funkei far beyond most terrestrial predators in raw biting capability. The jaws functioned as crushing instruments capable of seizing enormous prey and preventing escape through sheer pressure alone. Its teeth reinforced this design. Individual teeth reached lengths approaching 30 centimeters, nearly twice the size of those belonging to the largest carnivorous dinosaurs on land. Thick, conical, and deeply rooted within the jaw, they were not specialized for slicing flesh into narrow cuts like shark teeth. Instead, they acted as penetrating spikes designed to grip violently struggling prey during impact and hold it through immense force. Unlike some marine predators built primarily for endurance swimming, Pliosaurus funkei moved through the water using 4 large flippers that generated remarkable maneuverability. The arrangement allowed rapid acceleration and sudden directional changes with minimal warning. In open marine environments, this form of locomotion may have made the animal especially dangerous at close range. Rather than relying on prolonged pursuit, it likely approached prey through short bursts of controlled speed before striking with overwhelming momentum. Evidence from related pliosaurs provides insight into what such predators consumed. Fossilized stomach contents and bite traces reveal diets including ichthyosaurs, long-necked plesiosaurs, large fish, and other marine reptiles. In Jurassic ecosystems already crowded with apex hunters, pliosaurs occupied a position above nearly everything else. Their attacks may have originated from below, where dim water concealed approach until the final seconds before impact. In an ocean layered with predation, they represented one of the highest levels yet achieved. What makes the discovery especially striking is geographical contrast. Today, Svalbard exists beneath Arctic cold and seasonal darkness, but during the Jurassic, the region lay beneath comparatively warm seas connected to a global marine network rich with life. The cliffs preserving Predator X were once soft seabeds beneath open water where giant reptiles moved through currents carrying ammonites and shoals of fish across submerged continental shelves. The existence of Pliosaurus funkei illustrates how fully the Jurassic Ocean had transformed into a system capable of supporting predators of extraordinary scale and specialization. Across earlier ages, evolution repeatedly escalated the relationship between hunter and hunted, refining vision, speed, armor, biting force, and locomotion through endless environmental pressure. In the pliosaurs, many of those evolutionary threads converged into animals built almost entirely around the mechanics of marine predation. Beneath the warm Jurassic surface, creatures like Predator X moved through a world where survival depended not only on avoiding danger, but on enduring within ecosystems already saturated by it. Even among the monsters of that ocean, the largest pliosaurs stood apart, massive enough that their fossils still seem improbable when first exposed to Arctic light after more than 140 million years beneath the stone. By the beginning of the Cretaceous period, around 145 million years ago, the Mesozoic ocean had entered a state of extraordinary abundance. Continents sat lower beneath rising seas, climates remained intensely warm across much of the planet, and marine ecosystems expanded into flooded continental interiors on a scale rarely matched elsewhere in Earth's history. The result was not simply a larger ocean, but a denser and more productive one, capable of sustaining enormous numbers of predators simultaneously within the same connected marine systems. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels stood far above those of the modern world, trapping heat across the planet and preventing the formation of permanent polar ice. Global temperatures remained several degrees warmer than today, even near high latitudes. Sea levels rose between approximately 100 and 200 meters higher than present coastlines, submerging vast regions beneath shallow inland seas. Warm currents circulated freely between ocean basins, distributing nutrients and maintaining long growing seasons for microscopic plankton communities drifting near the surface. Those plankton blooms formed the foundation of immense food webs extending downward through every level of the water column. Small fish fed upon suspended organic matter in staggering quantities. Larger fish preyed upon them. Sharks, marine reptiles, cephalopods, and giant predators occupied increasingly specialized ecological positions above that foundation. Across the Cretaceous Sea, productivity accumulated upward into one of the most densely layered predatory ecosystems Earth had yet produced. Nowhere illustrated this more clearly than the Western Interior Seaway. Stretching across the center of North America, this shallow inland sea connected the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, dividing the continent into separate eastern and western landmasses for millions of years. At its greatest extent, the seaway reached roughly 600 miles in width and nearly 2,000 miles in length. Yet, despite that enormous scale, much of it remained comparatively shallow, with maximum depths approaching approximately 760 meters. Warm sunlight penetrated deeply into these nutrient-rich waters, supporting continuous biological activity from shoreline to open basin. Rivers draining from nearby landmasses carried additional minerals and sediment into the seaway, intensifying plankton productivity further. The result was an immense marine corridor crowded with fish, ammonites, sharks, sea turtles, diving birds, marine reptiles, and drifting invertebrates, moving through interconnected ecosystems from north to south. Much of what is known about this vanished environment comes from the Niobrara Chalk Formation in present-day Kansas, where fine marine sediments accumulated slowly across the floor of the Western Interior Seaway. The preservation within these deposits is extraordinary. Fossils retain delicate skeletal details, stomach contents, tooth marks, and even impressions of soft tissue structures in some specimens. Thousands of marine organisms have been recovered from these rocks, creating one of the clearest windows into any prehistoric ocean ecosystem ever discovered. Within this environment, older Jurassic predator dynasties began fading. The giant pliosaurs that once dominated open marine food webs declined gradually during the early Cretaceous. Ichthyosaurs also disappeared before the period ended, leaving vacant ecological roles across the upper levels of marine predation. Into that vacancy moved an entirely different lineage. Around 98 million years ago, mosasaurs began spreading rapidly through the world's oceans. Unlike the earlier plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, mosasaurs descended from marine lizards more closely related to monitor lizards and snakes than to any dinosaur. Their ancestors likely occupied semi-aquatic coastal habitats before adapting fully to marine life. Once established within the sea, however, their expansion proceeded with remarkable speed. Their bodies evolved toward powerful, streamlined forms with elongated tails driving propulsion through open water. Limbs transformed into flippers. Jaws became flexible and heavily armed with recurved teeth designed for gripping struggling prey. Within only a few million years, mosasaurs expanded into nearly every major marine basin on Earth, replacing declining reptilian predators and establishing themselves as the dominant apex hunters of the late Cretaceous ocean. The Western Interior Seaway became one of their great centers of power. Beneath warm, shallow water stretching across the heart of ancient North America, predator hierarchies compressed into astonishing density. Large sharks shared the sea with giant marine reptiles. Schools of fish moved constantly between reefs and open water, while enormous hunters crossed above them through sunlit currents, thick with life. By the middle of the Cretaceous, the ocean had become not merely dangerous, but structurally organized around predation at nearly every visible scale. Along the shorelines of the late Cretaceous world, some reptiles still moved between land and water, hunting through estuaries and coastal shallows much as monitor lizards do today. Their bodies remained partly adapted for walking, their tails useful both for swimming and movement across mud or sand. Yet within a relatively brief evolutionary interval, certain descendants of these semi-aquatic hunters transformed so completely that they became among the most dominant marine predators that Earth had ever produced. These were the mosasaurs. They were not dinosaurs, though they lived beside them. They were not plesiosaurs or ichthyosaurs, despite occupying similar marine roles. Their ancestry lay instead among lizards, with close evolutionary relationships to monitor lizards and snakes. Once they entered the ocean fully, however, the sea reshaped them with extraordinary speed. Limbs flattened into broad flippers, tails deepened into powerful propulsion structures capable of driving long bodies through open water with surprising force. Their jaws loosened and expanded through flexible joints that allowed enormous prey to be swallowed whole. The skull structure of mosasaurs reflected a world where predators often consumed animals nearly their own size. Double-hinged jaws widened dramatically during feeding, while recurved teeth prevented captured prey from backing out once seized. Additional pterygoid teeth lining the roof of the mouth formed a second gripping surface above the lower jaws. When prey entered the mouth, these teeth pulled it deeper inward with alternating movements, creating a feeding mechanism from which escape became almost geometrically impossible. Within the western interior seaway, several giant mosasaur species occupied overlapping predatory niches simultaneously. Among the largest was Pliosaurus, estimated between 12 and 14 meters in length. Fossil evidence reveals a diet astonishingly broad, even by apex predator standards. Stomach contents preserve remains of fish, sharks, seabirds, sea turtles, plesiosaurs, and other mosasaurs. In these warm inland seas, Tylosaurus appears to have functioned as a highly opportunistic hunter, willing to attack nearly any organism it could overpower. Its elongated body moved through shallow marine corridors, where visibility remained relatively clear beneath sunlit water rich with plankton and fish. The tail generated propulsion, while the flippers stabilized sudden turns during pursuit. Unlike the massive pliosaurs before them, mosasaurs combined size with flexibility, producing predators capable not only of force, but of remarkable maneuverability in crowded ecosystems. Another species, Mosasaurus hoffmanii, reached similarly immense proportions and may, in some fragmentary cases, have approached 17 meters in length. The skulls alone were so massive that when the earliest specimen was discovered in a Dutch limestone quarry during the 18th century, naturalists initially believed they had uncovered the remains of a crocodile. Even before complete scientific reconstruction, the scale of the animal suggested something fundamentally unlike the marine reptiles known at the time. Not all mosasaurs specialized in hunting large vertebrates. Prognathodon evolved a more heavily built skull with shorter, rounded teeth adapted for crushing rather than slicing. Its feeding style focused on hard-shelled prey, including ammonites, sea turtles, and heavily armored fish. Instead of acting like blades, its jaws functioned more like hydraulic presses, capable of shattering resistant shells beneath immense pressure. Globidens followed this trend even further. Reaching approximately 6 meters in length and weighing several tons, it possessed rounded ball-shaped teeth specialized for cracking shells apart. Ecologically, it occupied a role somewhat comparable to modern sea otters, though magnified to enormous scale within the predatory environment of the Cretaceous Ocean. The remarkable aspect of the Western Interior Seaway was not simply that giant predators existed there, but that so many existed together within the same connected ecosystem. Large sharks crossed paths with multiple mosasaur species. Plesiosaurs still hunted through deeper water. Giant fish moved through plankton-rich currents beneath diving seabirds and drifting ammonites. Nearly every visible creature belonged simultaneously to the roles of hunter and hunted, depending on circumstance and scale. Within this dense marine world, mosasaurs became the defining predators of the late Cretaceous. Marine lizards, transformed by evolutionary pressure into fully oceanic hunters, whose success spread across nearly every major sea on Earth before the age itself finally approached its violent end. Movement through the Western Interior Seaway rarely belonged to a single predator for long. Beneath the warm Cretaceous surface, mosasaurs crossed open water with immense size and flexibility, yet other hunters moved through the same currents beside them, occupying nearby ecological layers within one of the most crowded, predatory systems Earth had ever produced. Among these competitors was a shark whose body plan already resembled something familiar to the modern ocean, though scaled for a world far more saturated with danger. Its name was Cretoxorhina mantelli. Reaching approximately 6 to 7 meters in length, Cretoxorhina rivaled large modern great white sharks in overall scale, but its environment demanded greater agility and persistence than most modern marine ecosystems require. The Western Interior Seaway was shallow, biologically dense, and crowded with large reptiles capable of sudden violence. In such conditions, speed and maneuverability became essential. Fossil evidence suggests Cretoxorhina possessed a streamlined body adapted for fast, sustained swimming, allowing it to move efficiently through long inland marine corridors extending across ancient North America. Its teeth became the defining feature of the species. Deeply serrated, triangular, and blade-like, they resembled precision-cutting instruments rather than crushing spikes. Throughout the shark's life, these teeth replaced themselves continuously, moving forward in rows as older teeth broke or wore away. Some fossil discoveries preserve extraordinary concentrations of detached teeth surrounding skeletal remains, with as many as 250 teeth found within the same deposits. These accumulations provide unusually detailed insight into the feeding anatomy of the animal and reveal a predator designed for repeated slicing attacks against large, struggling prey. The cutting efficiency of those teeth eventually earned Cretoxorhina the informal nickname Ginsu shark, after a style of heavily marketed kitchen knife, though the ancient predator itself required no comparison to modern tools. In the late Cretaceous Sea, the shark functioned as one of the most effective vertebrate hunters within an ecosystem already crowded by giant reptiles. What distinguishes Cretoxorhina especially clearly within the fossil record is the direct evidence of its interactions with other large animals. In one remarkable specimen, a fossilized pteranodon skeleton contains Cretoxorhina teeth embedded within the bones. Pteranodon, a giant flying reptile with enormous wingspans, often skimmed coastal waters or rested on the sea surface between flights. At least some individuals appear to have become prey for sharks rising from below, demonstrating that the food web of the Western Interior Seaway extended even into the air above the water. Another fossil from Kansas preserves perhaps an even more revealing interaction. Vertebrae belonging to a Tylosaurus mosasaur contain embedded Cretoxorhina teeth, direct evidence that the shark attacked a marine reptile measuring at least 8 meters in length. Whether the encounter involved active predation or scavenging afterward remains difficult to determine with certainty, but the injuries demonstrate that Cretoxorina engaged directly with some of the largest predators sharing its environment. The Cretaceous Sea therefore supported not isolated apex hunters, but overlapping networks of competition between giant sharks and giant reptiles, occupying many of the same prey ranges simultaneously. Mosasaurs hunted fish, turtles, seabirds, and marine reptiles. Cretoxorina pursued similarly broad prey while relying on speed, cutting dentition, and repeated attacks rather than crushing bite force alone. The distinction between hunter and rival often blurred beneath the surface. For millions of years, Cretoxorina remained among the dominant sharks of the western interior seaway. Yet despite its effectiveness, the lineage eventually declined as mosasaurs diversified further across global oceans. Marine reptiles expanded into increasingly specialized predatory roles while occupying larger portions of the upper food web. In evolutionary terms, this appears to represent one of the rare intervals where sharks lost direct ecological competition against another predator group rather than surviving beside it. By the later stages of the Cretaceous, the inland sea crossing North America had become a place where giant lizards, enormous sharks, flying reptiles, and vast schools of fish existed within constant overlap. Nearly every major predator possessed evidence of wounds, embedded teeth, or partially healed injuries from encounters with others sharing the same waters. The western interior seaway was not organized around a single dominant species, but around continuous pressure between many of them, each adapted for a different method of surviving within the same immense and crowded marine arena. Far below the brighter upper layers of the Cretaceous Sea, movement became slower and more deliberate. Light weakened with depth, dissolving into green darkness, where suspended particles drifted through the water like fine ash. In these lower regions of the water column, another lineage of marine reptiles moved with an entirely different strategy from the violent acceleration of mosasaurs or the cutting pursuit of sharks. Here, precision mattered more than impact, and silence became a form of concealment. Among the strangest of these animals was Elasmosaurus platurus. Its fossils were discovered in Kansas during the late 19th century, preserved within the chalk deposits left behind by the vanished western interior seaway. When paleontologist Edward Drinker Cope attempted the first reconstruction in 1868, he attached the skull to the wrong end of the skeleton, mistaking the extraordinarily long neck for a tail. The error became one of the most famous moments in paleontological history, not because of carelessness alone, but because no previously known vertebrate possessed proportions remotely similar to this creature. Correctly assembled, Elasmosaurus revealed a body approximately 14 meters long, with more than half of that total length consisting entirely of neck. Between 71 and 76, cervical vertebrae formed an elongated structure, unlike anything in the modern ocean. By comparison, the human neck contains only 7 vertebrae. Even among plesiosaurs, Elasmosaurus represented an extreme experiment in anatomical design. For many years, artists and early researchers imagined the animal lifting its neck high above the sea surface like a swan. Later biomechanical studies suggested this was unlikely. A neck extending more than 7 meters could not easily support itself vertically outside the water without enormous strain. Instead, current interpretations propose a subtler purpose. Elasmosaurus may have approached schools of fish slowly from below or from the side, keeping its larger body distant while only the narrow head and flexible neck moved into striking range. In the dim lower waters of the seaway, this separation between body and mouth may have reduced disturbance within dense prey schools. The head itself remained relatively small compared with the enormous body supporting it. Its teeth were thin, peg-like, and tightly interlocking, suited less for tearing flesh than for trapping slippery prey. Fish and squid likely formed much of its diet. Once captured, prey was swallowed whole rather than dismembered. The feeding strategy depended on speed over short distances and careful positioning rather than brute force. Movement came from 4 large flippers operating in coordinated underwater flight. Like the giant pliosaurs that once dominated earlier oceans, Elasmosaurus propelled itself through simultaneous strokes of all 4 limbs, producing smooth and highly controlled motion through open water. Yet where pliosaurs used this system for explosive attacks against massive prey, Elasmosaurus appears to have used it for stability and quiet maneuvering within deeper layers of the sea. Evidence from fossils found in Kansas reveals another unusual adaptation. Inside the body cavities of several specimens, researchers discovered collections of smooth, polished stones known as gastroliths. These stones had been deliberately swallowed during life and retained within the stomach. Their exact function remains debated, though many paleontologists interpret them as ballast. Additional internal weight would have helped the animal regulate buoyancy with greater precision, allowing it to hover at particular depths without constant swimming effort. This ability may have been especially important within the layered structure of the Cretaceous ocean. Temperature, salinity, light, and oxygen shifted vertically through the water column, creating distinct ecological zones stacked atop one another. Elasmosaurus occupied a predatory niche different from the larger hunters patrolling the surface above. It did not require crushing jaws or immense bite force. Instead, it relied upon distance, positioning, and an anatomy so elongated that even experienced scientists initially struggled to understand which direction the creature had once faced. In the warm inland sea covering ancient North America, giant sharks crossed paths with mosasaurs near the upper waters while long necks drifted silently beneath them, extending through the darkness like living currents. Moving through a world where survival often depended less upon size alone than upon the precise control of movement within the immense vertical depths of the sea. At the end of the Cretaceous, the oceans were crowded with predators so large and specialized that the structure of the sea itself seemed permanently established. Warm currents crossed the planet without polar ice to interrupt them. Giant reptiles hunted through inland seaways and open continental shelves. Ammonites drifted in impossible numbers beneath the surface, while sharks, fish, and cephalopods filled every layer of the water column. After nearly 200 million years of reptilian dominance, the Mesozoic ocean appeared stable in its violence, ancient in its hierarchy, and immense beyond alteration. Then, 66 million years ago, the sky changed. An asteroid, estimated between 10 and 15 kilometers wide, struck the shallow carbonate platform of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. It arrived at roughly 20 kilometers per second, carrying more kinetic energy than any natural event witnessed by human civilization. In geological moments, rock beneath the Gulf of Mexico liquefied and vaporized. The impact excavated a crater more than 180 kilometers wide, releasing energy equivalent to billions of nuclear explosions unfolding simultaneously through ocean, atmosphere, and crust. The immediate effects across the sea were almost beyond physical comparison. Water near the impact site vanished into steam and superheated debris before collapsing back into the basin. Megatsunamis radiated outward across surrounding coastlines, tearing sediments from the seafloor and carrying them far inland. Layers deposited by these waves remain visible today within Caribbean rock formations, preserved as quiet evidence of a moment when entire marine environments were displaced in a matter of hours. Yet the deeper catastrophe unfolded gradually, through darkness rather than force. Dust, sulfate aerosols, soot from global wildfires, and pulverized rock entered the upper atmosphere almost immediately after impact. Sunlight dimmed across the planet. For months, perhaps years, the oceans received only a fraction of their normal light. Photosynthetic plankton near the surface began to collapse. These microscopic organisms had formed the foundation of nearly every marine food chain on Earth. Without them, the energy flow sustaining the open ocean weakened from the bottom upward. Small filter feeders disappeared first. Larger fish lost their food sources soon after. Predators that had once crossed entire seaways in search of prey entered oceans growing steadily quieter and more biologically empty. The extinctions spread through the marine ecosystem like a slow current moving upward through layers of water. At the same time, atmospheric gases dissolved into surface seas, rapidly altering ocean chemistry. Carbon dioxide and sulfur compounds mixed into seawater, increasing acidification across already stressed ecosystems. Organisms dependent on calcium carbonate struggled to maintain shells and skeletons. The same chemical vulnerability that had helped devastate the Permian Ocean returned again, though this time compressed into a span unimaginably fast by geological standards. The western interior seaway also approached its end. Long before the asteroid struck, tectonic uplift had begun reshaping the interior of North America. Gradually, the shallow inland sea drained and retreated. Within only a few million years after the extinction, the immense marine corridor that once stretched from the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico vanished entirely, leaving behind chalk deposits and fossil beds beneath what would eventually become the plains of Kansas. The extinction itself erased nearly every giant marine reptile lineage remaining on Earth. Mosasaurs disappeared completely. Pliosaurs vanished beside them. Ammonites, survivors of earlier extinctions that had endured for hundreds of millions of years, ended alongside the final reptilian hunters of the Mesozoic seas. An ocean ruled by enormous vertebrate predators for roughly 180 million years suddenly contained none at all. The survivors were mostly small. Small sharks moved through emptied coastal waters, small fish sheltered in fragmented ecosystems near surviving plankton communities. Deep beneath the surface, microscopic organisms that had endured the darkness within less affected layers of water quietly continued the long work of keeping the ocean alive, carrying forward the first fragile beginnings of a new marine world. In the millions of years after the asteroid impact, the oceans entered an unfamiliar quiet. The immense marine reptiles that had dominated the Mesozoic vanished completely, leaving behind ecological spaces that remained strangely empty across the recovering seas. No mosasaurs crossed the continental shelves. No plesiosaurs drifted through deeper layers of water. The giant predators that had once shaped entire marine food webs disappeared so thoroughly that the early Paleogene ocean contained no creature remotely comparable in scale or power. For a time, the largest marine hunters on Earth were sharks scarcely longer than 3 or 4 meters, moving through ecosystems still rebuilding from collapse. Along distant coastlines, meanwhile, small mammals survived almost unnoticed. Most were nocturnal, generalized animals adapted for uncertainty rather than specialization. They fed on insects, sheltered in burrows, and reproduced quickly. Yet within these modest survivors existed a flexibility that would eventually reshape the sea once again. Over millions of years, some mammalian lineages began exploring river mouths, tidal flats, and shallow coastal environments where fish and other marine prey remained abundant. Among the earliest known members of this transition was Pakicetus, an animal that lived approximately 53 million years ago along the shores of a warm sea covering parts of what is now Pakistan. At first glance, it scarcely resembled a whale at all. It possessed 4 functional legs, a long tail, and a body roughly comparable in size to a wolf. Fossil evidence suggests it moved primarily on land, though its dense limb bones and skull anatomy indicate an increasing association with shallow water habitats. It hunted fish near the shoreline while still remaining fundamentally terrestrial. What followed became one of the clearest large-scale evolutionary transformations preserved anywhere in the fossil record. Within roughly 10 million years, descendants of these shoreline mammals had undergone extraordinary anatomical change. Transitional forms reveal hind limbs gradually shrinking while the spine and tail adapted for swimming. Nostrils migrated upward along the skull. The pelvis detached from the vertebral column, freeing the body for more efficient aquatic motion. Reproductive systems internalized, allowing fully aquatic lifestyles without the vulnerability of returning to land. Eventually, fluked tails replaced hind limb propulsion entirely. The speed of this transformation appears remarkable, even against geological timescales. Layer by layer, fossils discovered across Pakistan, Egypt, and North America preserve nearly every stage of the transition, from wading mammals to fully oceanic whales. Few other macroevolutionary sequences are documented with such continuity. By approximately 40 million years ago, the Eocene ocean had produced Basilosaurus, an apex predator unlike any marine reptile that came before it. Reaching lengths between 15 and 20 meters, Basilosaurus possessed a long, narrow, serpentine body that moved through the water in sweeping undulations. Despite its name, which means king lizard, it was entirely mammalian, breathing air through lungs and nursing live young. Its skull carried differentiated teeth capable of slicing flesh and gripping struggling prey. Fossil evidence from Egypt preserves bite marks attributed to Basilosaurus on smaller whales known as Dorudon, including juvenile individuals. The new rulers of the sea were not reptiles returning from ancient lineages, but mammals whose ancestors had once walked cautiously beside rivers and shorelines. The transition also revealed something deeper about the ocean itself. Across hundreds of millions of years, entirely unrelated groups repeatedly evolved towards similar ecological roles once they entered marine environments. Ichthyosaurs converged upon shapes later echoed by dolphins. Mosasaurs and sharks occupied overlapping predatory niches despite profound evolutionary distance. Now mammals, descendants of small terrestrial survivors, moved steadily toward the same open water dominance once held by giant reptiles. The ocean did not preserve dynasties permanently. It preserved opportunities. Currents, pressure, buoyancy, and the distribution of prey imposed the same physical demands generation after generation, shaping bodies through repetition across immense spans of time. In the recovering Eocene seas, mammals became the latest lineage drawn into that ancient process, adapting bone, muscle, hearing, and movement until creatures descended from land animals once again ruled the open ocean, gliding through waters that had already forgotten the reptiles that came before them. By the Miocene epoch, the oceans had become crowded again. Tens of millions of years had passed since the extinction that erased the marine reptiles of the Mesozoic, and in that immense interval, the sea rebuilt itself into something both familiar and entirely new. Mammals now occupied niches once held by mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. Vast schools of fish crossed nutrient-rich currents beneath expanding populations of whales. Coastal ecosystems thickened with seals and sea cows, while deep offshore waters supported predators of extraordinary size. The ocean no longer belonged to reptiles, yet it had not become gentler in their absence. If anything, the density of large life within the Miocene Sea created an environment more biologically intense than almost any ocean before it. Global climates during much of the Miocene remained relatively warm, and tectonic changes altered ocean circulation in ways that increased marine productivity across several regions of the planet. Upwelling currents carried nutrients from deep water toward the surface, feeding enormous plankton blooms that supported dense food webs from microscopic organisms upward through increasingly massive animals. Baleen whales diversified into forms ranging from compact coastal grazers to gigantic open-water filter feeders. Toothed whales evolved alongside them, becoming swift hunters capable of coordinated predation and complex communication. This abundance transformed the sea into a concentrated reservoir of biological energy, and predators responded accordingly. Among them was Otodus Megalodon, the largest shark known to have existed. Estimates vary, though many reconstructions place adult individuals between 15 and 20 meters in length, with body masses potentially approaching 100 tons. Its teeth alone reached nearly 18 centimeters long, thick and triangular, with finely serrated edges designed for cutting through flesh and bone. Long before their true origin was understood, these teeth were collected by early naturalists who believed they were fossilized, tongues of dragons turned to stone within the earth. Megalodon hunted the whales that filled the Miocene Ocean. Fossilized whale bones discovered in marine sediments preserve deep bite marks, matching the shape and spacing of Megalodon teeth. Some injuries show evidence of healing, suggesting attacks survived by the prey animal, while others indicate catastrophic damage to ribs, vertebrae, and flippers. Many paleontologists believe the shark often targeted propulsion structures first, crippling large whales before returning to feed. Its scale becomes difficult to fully visualize, even when reduced to measurements. The jaws of a large individual could open wide enough for two adult humans to stand side by side within the mouth. Its teeth were not merely longer than those of living sharks, but far heavier and structurally thicker, built to withstand enormous bite forces generated by a body larger than many modern whales. Yet the Miocene Sea was not shaped by a single predator alone. The same ecosystems supporting Megalodon also sustained giant predatory sperm whales, macroraptorial hunters armed not with rows of replaceable teeth, but with massive skulls and powerful jaws adapted for seizing large prey directly. In some regions, these whales occupied ecological roles overlapping with the giant shark itself. Both hunted marine mammals, both operated across open ocean environments. Both possessed the size to challenge nearly anything alive within their ecosystems. The Miocene, therefore, became a rare moment in Earth's history when multiple apex predators of enormous scale coexisted within the same seas. Giant sharks crossed paths with giant whales, while dense populations of marine mammals filled surrounding waters. The predator hierarchies of the ocean grew increasingly layered and competitive, shaped by speed, endurance, intelligence, and feeding strategy rather than size alone. Far beneath them, the structure of the ocean itself continued its older work. Currents redistributed heat across continents. Nutrients rose invisibly through dark water toward the sunlit surface. Migratory pathways stretched across entire ocean basins. The abundance of the Miocene did not emerge from a single species, but from the interaction between climate, geology, circulation, and biological opportunity accumulated over millions of years. For a time, those conditions produced an ocean containing some of the largest hunters the planet had ever sustained simultaneously, moving through crowded seas where immense predators no longer ruled alone, but beside rivals equally shaped by the deep and ancient abundance surrounding them. The desert coastline of southern Peru does not immediately resemble the remains of an ancient sea. Dry wind moves across pale cliffs where almost no vegetation grows, and the ground breaks apart beneath the sun into layers of exposed sediment older than human civilization by incomprehensible margins. Yet beneath these deserts lies the preserved floor of the Miocene Ocean, compressed into the Pisco Formation, where whales, sharks, seabirds, and giant predators settled into soft marine sediment millions of years before the Andes reached their present height. In November of 2008, during the final day of a field expedition to this formation, paleontologist Class Post noticed fragments of bone emerging from the rock. What first appeared to be another fossil whale gradually revealed itself as something far stranger. Embedded within a partially exposed skull were enormous teeth, still rooted inside the jaw after millions of years underground. The skull itself measured nearly 3 meters long. The animal would later receive the name Livyatan melvillei. Its genus name derived from the Hebrew word associated with the biblical sea monster Leviathan, while the species name honored Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick. The comparison was unusually appropriate. Unlike the gentle filter feeding whales dominating many modern oceans, Livyatan belonged to an older lineage of raptorial sperm whales built specifically for active predation. Modern sperm whales possess teeth primarily in the lower jaw and rely heavily on suction feeding when hunting squid in the deep ocean. Livyatan was constructed differently. Functional teeth lined both the upper and lower jaws, forming an immense biting apparatus designed not for grasping soft prey in darkness, but for seizing and controlling large marine animals directly. Adult body length estimates range between 13 and 17 meters, placing it among the largest predatory mammals ever known. Its teeth remain among the most extraordinary features ever recovered from a marine predator. Individual teeth measured more than 36 centimeters long, the largest known biting teeth of any animal in Earth's history. Unlike tusks, which evolved primarily for display, combat, or digging, these teeth function directly in feeding. Thick enamel and massive roots suggest a jaw capable of withstanding immense pressure during violent struggles with prey. The Miocene Ocean already contained Megalodon during this period, and the existence of Livyatan reveals that giant sharks did not dominate those seas uncontested. The two predators occupied overlapping ecological roles, hunting many of the same marine mammals across productive, coastal, and offshore environments. Fossil evidence from the Pisco Formation includes abundant baleen whales of varying sizes, providing a rich food source capable of sustaining multiple apex predators simultaneously. Yet their hunting strategies appear to have differed profoundly. Megalodon likely relied on ambush and catastrophic bite damage, attacking from below with enormous force before allowing weakened prey to bleed or collapse from injury. Livyatan, by contrast, possessed the neurological and sensory advantages of a mammal. Its enlarged cranial structures strongly suggest sophisticated echolocation abilities similar to those used by living-toothed whales. Some paleontologists propose that Livyatan may also have hunted cooperatively in pods, coordinating attacks across extended chases rather than relying entirely on sudden impact. The possibility that these animals encountered one another remains scientifically plausible and deeply unresolved. Both occupied the same oceans during overlapping intervals of the Miocene. Both hunted whales. Both reached sizes capable of threatening nearly any marine organism alive at the time. Debate continues regarding which predator would possess the advantage during direct conflict, because the answer depends heavily upon context, depth, group behavior, and the nature of the encounter itself. Eventually, the ocean changed once again. Global cooling intensified during the later Miocene, reshaping marine circulation and reducing populations of the large baleen whales that supported both giant predators. Livyatan disappeared sometime between roughly 5 and 9 million years ago. Megalodon endured longer, though it too eventually vanished approximately 3.6 million years ago. Their extinction marked the end of a remarkable interval when the oceans simultaneously supported gigantic predatory sharks and gigantic predatory whales. Each evolved toward dominance through entirely different branches of life, moving through the same cold currents beneath a world already beginning to resemble the modern sea. There was no single day when the ocean suddenly became empty of Megalodon. No impact scar marked the end of its reign. No layer of ash buried its final hunting grounds in a geological instant. For millions of years, the animal had crossed warm oceans as one of the largest predators that Earth had ever produced. And then, within a comparatively brief interval of geological time, it vanished completely from the fossil record. Its extinction remains one of the most closely studied disappearances in paleontology because it reveals something deeply consistent about life in the sea. The larger and more specialized a predator becomes, the more tightly its survival is bound to the stability of the world surrounding it. During the late Miocene and into the Pliocene, Earth's climate began shifting toward cooler global conditions. One of the most important drivers of this transformation was the gradual closure of the Isthmus of Panama, the rising land bridge connecting North and South America. Before this closure, warm equatorial waters circulated freely between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. As the seaway narrowed and eventually disappeared, global ocean circulation reorganized itself. Currents changed direction, heat distribution altered, and tropical waters slowly cooled. The consequences spread quietly through the marine food web. Large baleen whales, which had flourished throughout the Miocene, began adjusting their migratory behavior in response to changing ocean temperatures and nutrient patterns. Productive feeding grounds increasingly concentrated toward colder polar waters, where seasonal upwellings supported dense blooms of plankton and krill. The whales followed the food. Megalodon could not follow as easily. Although debate continues regarding the degree to which the species regulated its body temperature, evidence strongly suggests that such an enormous shark depended heavily upon warm and temperate seas. A predator reaching lengths estimated between 15 and 20 meters required extraordinary quantities of energy simply to remain alive. Hunting success needed to remain consistent across vast stretches of ocean. As whale populations shifted poleward, many of the richest feeding grounds drifted beyond the environmental limits that Megalodon appears to have tolerated comfortably. At the same time, competition within the ocean intensified. Early ancestors of the modern orca were emerging during the Pliocene, smaller than Megalodon, but faster, more adaptable, and capable of cooperative hunting behavior. Unlike a solitary giant shark dependent on overwhelming physical scale, these early predatory whales hunted in coordinated groups, targeting juvenile whales and weakened individuals within migratory populations. They occupied overlapping ecological space with Megalodon, while demanding far fewer calories per individual body. The difference mattered. Gigantic size had once granted Megalodon enormous advantages. Its teeth, thicker and heavier than those of any living shark, could remove immense sections of flesh with a single bite. Its body mass allowed it to dominate most marine animals alive during the Miocene. Yet the same scale that made the shark formidable also reduced its flexibility. Smaller predators can adapt more easily to declining prey populations, shifting habitats, and ecological instability. Megalodon had evolved toward extreme specialization within an ocean that no longer remained stable enough to support it. Fossils reveal the final stages only in fragments. Teeth become rarer in younger rock layers. Geographic distribution contracts. Then the record stops. The last confirmed Megalodon fossils date to approximately 3.6 million years ago. By then, the species had existed in some form for roughly 23 million years, enduring longer than many mountain ranges and surviving climatic changes that reshaped entire coastlines. Its disappearance was not caused by sudden catastrophe, but by gradual environmental restructuring unfolding over hundreds of thousands of years. Ocean currents shifted, temperatures cooled, prey migrated, competitors evolved, and eventually, the conditions that once supported the largest shark in Earth's history no longer existed. The ocean itself had changed shape around the predator until the animal no longer fit within it. Long before any giant predator crossed the open sea, the ocean itself had already become capable of reshaping life on a planetary scale. Teeth, claws, armor, and speed belonged to individual creatures, but the sea operated through forces vast enough to engulf every shoreline and trench at once. Across Earth's history, the greatest marine extinctions were not caused by the rise of a stronger hunter. They came when the chemistry of the water changed, faster than life could adapt to it. The prehistoric ocean was not simply a body of water surrounding living things. It was an immense chemical engine, continuously balancing oxygen, carbon, temperature, salinity, acidity, and circulation. When even one part of that system shifted too far, entire ecosystems began to fail. When several shifted together, the ocean itself became lethal. One of the most destructive processes was ocean anoxia, the near-complete depletion of dissolved oxygen from seawater. Modern fish, crustaceans, and marine reptiles all depend upon oxygen dissolved invisibly through the water column, but oxygen levels in the ocean are not fixed. They rely upon currents, temperature gradients, atmospheric exchange, and photosynthetic activity near the surface. When those systems weaken, deep water can become stagnant and starved of oxygen. This happened repeatedly throughout Earth's past. During the Devonian extinctions, and later during parts of the Triassic, vast dead zones spread through ancient seas. Layers of dark, organic-rich shale preserved from these periods show environments where decomposition consumed oxygen faster than it could be replenished. In many regions, the seafloor became nearly uninhabitable. Animals that had survived predators for millions of years suffocated slowly inside the water they had evolved to breathe. At the same time, another process worked through the ocean with equal indifference. As atmospheric carbon dioxide dissolved into seawater, it formed carbonic acid, lowering the ocean's pH in a process known as acidification. The effect reached directly into the biological architecture of marine life. Corals, shellfish, echinoderms, and countless microscopic plankton species all relied upon calcium carbonate to build shells, skeletons, and reef structures. Acidified water dissolved that mineral faster than many organisms could replace it. The destruction unfolded from the bottom upward. Reefs weakened first, then collapsed entirely. Shell-forming plankton declined. The food chains built upon them began to unravel. Unlike a predator selecting individual prey, acidification attacked the structural framework of entire ecosystems simultaneously, reducing once complex seas into simplified biological deserts. During the Permian extinction, these pressures combined with something even more toxic. Geological evidence preserved in ancient rock biomarkers suggests that deep ocean waters became saturated with hydrogen sulfide gas produced by anaerobic bacteria thriving in oxygen-starved conditions. In a healthy ocean, such bacteria remain confined to isolated environments far below the surface. During the Permian collapse, however, circulation weakened so severely that poisoned deep water began rising upward into shallow seas and eventually into the sunlit surface layers where most marine life existed. Hydrogen sulfide is lethal to complex organisms even in relatively small concentrations. Entire regions of ocean may have become chemically poisonous. Temperature intensified every stage of the collapse. Many marine species tolerate only narrow thermal ranges because proteins inside living cells begin to lose structural stability when exposed to excessive heat. During the Permian crisis, tropical sea surface temperatures may have approached 40 degrees Celsius. In water, this warm metabolism accelerates while oxygen availability declines, forcing organisms into physiological conditions they cannot sustain for long. None of these forces acted alone. Heat reduced oxygen. Oxygen loss encouraged toxic bacterial growth. Acidification weakened biological structures already stressed by temperature. Each mechanism amplified the others in what paleontologists describe as a cascading kill system, a chain reaction spreading through the sea until the ocean itself ceased functioning as a stable environment for complex life. Against forces operating at that scale, even the greatest predators Earth ever produced became fragile things, drifting inside a much larger machine. Seen individually, the creatures that cross these ancient oceans can appear almost mythological, isolated giants separated by impossible spans of time. Yet when the full history is viewed together, stretching from the first sighted predators of the Cambrian to the mammalian hunters of the Miocene, a repeating structure begins to emerge beneath the surface of events. The ocean changes, life collapses, ecosystems empty, and from those emptied spaces something new rises to dominate the water once again. The pattern begins deep in the Precambrian world. Before the Cambrian explosion, the sea was populated largely by soft-bodied organisms drifting or resting across microbial plains beneath shallow water. Then came the collapse of the older Ediacaran ecosystems and the rapid appearance of animals capable of movement, vision, armor, and predation. The first complex eyes emerged, followed by grasping limbs, hardened shells, defensive spines, and faster nervous systems. Predators such as Anomalocaris did not arise within a stable environment. They emerged from ecological disruption, from a world where the previous rules had already broken apart. The same rhythm returned again and again. After the Ordovician extinction removed most marine species from the planet, surviving ecosystems reorganized themselves around new evolutionary opportunities. Jawed fish appeared. Eurypterids expanded. By the Devonian, vertebrate predators such as Dunkleosteus occupied ecological roles that had never existed before. When the placoderms disappeared during the Devonian collapse, sharks inherited the emptied seas. After the Permian extinction erased nearly all complex marine life, marine reptiles returned from land and transformed the Triassic Ocean into a completely different biological world. Later still, the end of the Cretaceous destroyed the reptilian dynasties that had ruled for more than 180 million years, leaving vacant oceans into which mammals gradually expanded. Again and again, catastrophe reset the structure of the sea. Extreme predators appear most often not in balanced ecosystems, but in ecosystems rebuilding themselves after devastation. Empty ecological roles create evolutionary pressure, unlike anything found in stable conditions. Prey species diversify rapidly to survive. Predators evolve in response. Defense encourages stronger offense, and stronger offense encourages more elaborate defense. Over millions of years, this feedback system drives escalation rather than equilibrium. The prehistoric ocean preserves that escalation in extraordinary detail. Calcite compound eyes capable of detecting movement through dim Cambrian water, rotary feeding structures crushing trilobites whole, bony guillotine jaws opening faster than prey could react. 4 flippered reptiles maneuvering through Jurassic seas with near-silent precision. Mosasaurs carrying additional teeth across the roof of the mouth so prey could not escape once seized. Sharks with serrated teeth designed to remove immense sections of flesh in a single strike. Sperm whales evolving echolocation powerful enough to track prey through darkness across entire bodies of water. Yet every one of these predators disappeared. Not because another hunter proved stronger, but because the environments they had adapted to no longer existed. The collapse always came from outside the individual animal itself. Oxygen vanished from the water. Temperatures shifted beyond physiological tolerance. Prey migrated. Ocean chemistry changed. Continents moved. Sunlight disappeared beneath atmospheric dust. Entire circulation systems reorganized themselves over geological time. Anomalocaris vanished as Cambrian ecosystems transformed into the more complex Ordovician world. Dunkleosteus disappeared when anoxic seas spread through Devonian waters. Mosasaurs died when the end Cretaceous impact collapsed marine food webs from the bottom upward. Megalodon survived for millions of years as one of the largest predators Earth had ever produced, only to disappear when cooling oceans altered whale migration and reshaped the marine ecosystems supporting it. Across more than 500 million years, the lesson remains remarkably consistent. Evolution can create creatures of astonishing precision, perfectly fitted to the worlds around them. But perfect adaptation carries its own hidden fragility. Because the more completely an organism belongs to a particular world, the more completely its survival depends upon that world remaining unchanged. After each collapse, when reefs dissolved, oxygen vanished, or sunlight failed across the sea, survival followed patterns far quieter than dominance. The fossil record shows this repeatedly. The creatures most likely to endure were rarely the largest hunters or the most specialized forms. Survival belonged more often to organisms capable of tolerating instability, scarcity, and rapid environmental change. Mass extinctions acted like filters operating against excess. Large-bodied species suffered first and most severely. Enormous predators required enormous energy intake, stable food webs, and broad ecological support systems extending through entire oceans. When those systems fractured, the mathematics of survival shifted against them almost immediately. A giant animal consumes more oxygen, matures more slowly, produces fewer offspring, and depends upon consistent access to prey populations large enough to sustain it. During periods of environmental collapse, those requirements become liabilities. Smaller organisms existed under different biological rules. A small fish, crustacean, or cephalopod requires comparatively little food. Smaller animals reproduce more quickly, accumulate genetic variation faster across generations, and recover from population crashes with greater speed. In extinction after extinction, the fossil record reveals the same disproportionate outcome. Large, specialized animals disappear in enormous numbers, while smaller, adaptable species continue through the disruption and repopulate the recovering world afterward. Diet also determined survival with remarkable consistency. Predators dependent upon a narrow range of prey often vanished alongside the ecosystems supporting them. When ammonites disappeared, the animals relying heavily upon them disappeared as well. When large whale populations shifted or declined during the late Cenozoic, predators built specifically around hunting them entered irreversible decline. Ecological specialization produced efficiency during stable eras, but instability punished it harshly. Generalists endured more successfully because they possessed flexibility rather than optimization. An animal capable of feeding opportunistically across multiple environments could survive temporary collapse in one food source long enough to exploit another. This pattern helps explain why sharks persisted through every major marine extinction across roughly 450 million years. Sharks are not a single uninterrupted lineage, but the broad body design itself proved extraordinarily resilient. Shark-shaped predators repeatedly reappeared because the underlying biological template remained effective across many different oceans and climates. Cartilaginous skeletons reduced energy costs. Efficient sensory systems functioned across murky or open water. Teeth replaced continuously throughout life. Most importantly, many sharks remained opportunistic feeders, capable of shifting prey according to availability. Some consumed fish, others scavenged carcasses, hunted squid, crushed shellfish, or filtered plankton directly from the water. That adaptability allowed sharks to survive ecological conditions that eliminated more specialized predators. Geographic range mattered as well. Species confined to isolated habitats or narrow environmental conditions faced greater risk during global disruption. When ocean chemistry shifted or coastlines disappeared, animals limited to those regions often vanished completely. Wide-ranging organisms possessed a statistical advantage. Somewhere across the planet, pockets of survivable conditions frequently remained, temporary refuges where populations could persist until broader recovery began. Few creatures demonstrate this principle more clearly than the horseshoe crab. Its body plan has changed comparatively little across immense spans of geological time. It survived the Ordovician extinction, the Devonian collapse, the Permian catastrophe, the end Triassic crisis, and the asteroid impact that ended the Cretaceous. The reason is not evolutionary superiority in the dramatic sense often imagined. Horseshoe crabs survive because they tolerate environmental fluctuation exceptionally well. Changes in salinity, oxygen concentration, temperature, and sediment conditions that would devastate more specialized organisms remain survivable for them. Across the history of the ocean, resilience repeatedly proved more durable than dominance. The predators that ruled prehistoric seas were extraordinary expressions of evolutionary escalation, built with astonishing precision for the worlds surrounding them. Yet the creatures that endured across multiple extinctions were usually simpler, broader in behavior, and biologically tolerant of instability. They survived not because conditions remained favorable, but because they could continue functioning when conditions ceased to resemble the environments they had evolved within. In the long memory of the ocean, flexibility outlasted perfection. The modern ocean can feel immense and untamed when viewed from the deck of a ship or through the lights of a descending submersible, yet in the scale of Earth's history, it exists in a strangely subdued state. The seas alive today are the result of roughly 66 million years of rebuilding after the catastrophe that ended the age of marine reptiles. Every reef, whale migration, deep-sea trench community, and open water food chain belongs to a world assembled slowly from the survivors of that collapse. Compared to many earlier oceans, this one is relatively restrained. Great white sharks remain formidable predators, capable of explosive bursts of speed and immense bite force. Orcas hunt cooperatively across entire coastlines and have learned specialized behaviors passed socially between generations. Sperm whales descend through kilometers of darkness to pursue squid in pressure conditions difficult for human technology to endure. Yet even with these animals present, the structure of the modern ocean appears calmer than the prehistoric systems that came before it. Food webs today generally rise through approximately 6 trophic levels before ending. There is no known marine predator occupying a stable ecological tier far above the great whales, large sharks, and orcas. No equivalent exists to the layered concentration of giant predators that once shared the same waters during parts of the Mesozoic. The western interior seaway of the late Cretaceous may represent the most densely populated concentration of simultaneously active apex predators in Earth's marine history. Warm, shallow water stretched across the center of North America, crowded with mosasaurs, giant sharks, long-necked plesiosaurs, enormous fish, marine turtles, diving birds, and cephalopods in extraordinary abundance. Predator interacted with predator constantly. Juveniles faced threats from almost every direction. The ocean surface, middle depths, and seafloor each supported separate layers of hunters overlapping within the same ecosystem. Nothing alive today fully resembles that arrangement. The closest modern analog to the great macro-predators of prehistory may be the sperm whale. Though physically different from mosasaurs or pliosaurs, it occupies a similarly specialized relationship with the deep ocean. Adult sperm whales descend to depths approaching 3,000 meters, entering regions where sunlight never penetrates and pressure exceeds hundreds of times that at the surface. There they hunt giant squid through darkness, using bursts of echolocation so powerful they remain among the loudest biological sounds ever measured. Much about this process remains imperfectly understood. Sperm whales navigate acoustically across enormous distances, constructing detailed sensory interpretations of environments inaccessible to human sight. Scars preserved across their skin reveal violent struggles with giant squid far below the reach of natural light. Their immense heads contain specialized tissues for sound production and focusing mechanisms, unlike anything evolved by earlier marine reptiles or fish. In many ways, they represent a continuation of the same evolutionary principle that shaped earlier apex predators: intelligence, sensory sophistication, and adaptation to ecological spaces where survival depends upon navigating conditions hostile to most life. At the same time, The modern ocean shows signs of chemical and physical change that echo patterns preserved repeatedly in the geological record. Average ocean temperatures continue to rise. Dissolved carbon dioxide steadily alters seawater chemistry through acidification. Some deep water regions already display declining oxygen concentrations. These processes are measurable across multiple basins and are no longer theoretical projections existing only in climate models or laboratory simulations. The significance of those changes becomes clearer when viewed against the immense history of the sea itself. Ancient extinctions demonstrate that ocean ecosystems remain stable only within certain environmental boundaries. When circulation weakens, when acidity rises too quickly, or when warming alters oxygen distribution beyond biological tolerance, marine systems can reorganize with extraordinary speed. The prehistoric oceans described across this long history were not destroyed by supernatural forces or isolated accidents. They changed through physical mechanisms, still operating today beneath every current and tide. The sea surrounding the modern world is ancient beyond comprehension, but it is not separate from the oceans that came before it. It is the latest version of the same restless system, still governed by the same chemistry, the same physics, and the same capacity for transformation. Far below the movement of waves and sunlight, the prehistoric ocean operated according to rules that were both brutal and strangely impartial. Predators rose, ecosystems expanded, extinction followed extinction, and yet life repeatedly returned in new forms. Seen across hundreds of millions of years, the question of what could survive such an ocean begins to shift into something quieter and more difficult to answer. Everything in this story survived. Anomalocaris survived for roughly 30 million years, drifting through Cambrian water as one of the earliest large predators ever assembled by evolution. Dunkleosteus ruled Devonian seas for more than 20 million years, carrying a bite force unmatched by any fish before or since. Mosasaurs spread through the late Cretaceous ocean so successfully that within only a few million years, they occupied nearly every major marine predator role available to them. Megalodon endured for approximately 23 million years, longer than the entire span separating modern humans from the earliest members of our species. By comparison, anatomically modern humans have existed for only around 300,000 years. In the scale of geological time, humanity occupies a moment so brief it is difficult to perceive without compressing Earth's history into abstraction. The deeper paradox inside the prehistoric ocean is that survival was never permanent. It was conditional. Every organism described throughout this long history existed in temporary alignment with the world surrounding it. Predators evolved for particular temperatures, prey distributions, oxygen levels, coastlines, and ocean currents. Their anatomy represented solutions to specific environmental circumstances existing only for limited stretches of planetary time. When those circumstances changed too quickly or too completely, even the most successful organisms lost the conditions that had once made them dominant. In that sense, extinction was not always failure. The prehistoric ocean did not betray its inhabitants. It created them through pressure, competition, and instability, operating continuously across immense spans of time. The violence of predation itself became one of the engines driving biological complexity forward. Faster movement, sharper vision, harder armor, more advanced nervous systems, social hunting, live birth, echolocation, efficient swimming mechanics, and increasingly sophisticated sensory systems all emerged within ecosystems where survival depended upon adaptation occurring faster than danger. The ocean sharpened life by refusing permanence. Even the long history of the trilobites reflects this pattern. For approximately 270 million years, they persisted through changing continents, shifting climates, and multiple waves of evolving predators. They endured the rise of fish, sea scorpions, and increasingly complex marine ecosystems. Entire lineages vanished around them, while trilobites continued in reduced but persistent forms across the seafloor. What ended them was not predation. At the close of the Permian, the chemistry of the ocean itself shifted beyond their tolerance. Oxygen collapsed, temperatures rose, acidification spread through the water column. Hydrogen sulfide accumulated in poisoned depths. The same environment that had supported trilobites for hundreds of millions of years ceased to function in the way their biology required. The ocean remained, but the relationship disappeared. That pattern echoes repeatedly through every era examined in this history. The strongest predators often proved highly vulnerable because their survival depended upon stable access to enormous quantities of food and tightly balanced environmental conditions. Generalists endured longer because they required less precision from the world around them. Small organisms repeatedly outlived giants because flexibility mattered more than dominance when ecosystems destabilized. Survival, in evolutionary terms, was never immortality, it was duration. Some species achieved that duration for spans so immense they almost exceed human imagination. Others vanished quickly after brief periods of extraordinary success. Yet all belonged equally to the same restless system, a planetary ocean constantly reshaping the possibilities of life through climate, chemistry, geography, and time. The prehistoric sea was therefore not simply a place where creatures struggled to avoid death. It was a mechanism for transformation, endlessly testing forms against changing conditions across 500 million years. Every predator, every extinction, every recovery, and every adaptation emerged from that process together, inseparable from the water that produced them and eventually reclaimed them. Long after the names of individual predators fade into geological silence, the larger shape of the ocean's history remains. Across more than 500 million years, the sea does not tell a story of gradual movement towards stability or safety. It tells a story of temporary worlds, assembled slowly, flourishing briefly, and then collapsing under forces vast enough to erase almost everything living within them. There is something unsettling in that rhythm because it repeats so consistently. The Cambrian Sea filled with strange, soft-bodied hunters and armored prey, then vanished into another configuration of life. The Devonian produced fish so heavily armed and efficient that entire ecosystems reorganized around them, only for oxygen collapse and environmental instability to erase those systems almost completely. The Jurassic and Cretaceous oceans became crowded with marine reptiles, layered food webs, and predators of immense scale, yet even those seas disappeared within moments of geological time when fire, impact, chemistry, and climate altered the conditions beneath which they had evolved. The 5 great mass extinctions do not appear in the fossil record as isolated accidents interrupting an otherwise stable world. They are woven directly into the structure of life's history. Complexity rises, ecosystems deepen, specialized organisms emerge, and eventually some shift in temperature, atmosphere, chemistry, circulation, or planetary geography changes the rules faster than adaptation can respond. The ocean rebuilds afterward, but never into the same shape twice. What makes this history feel strangely intimate is that none of the organisms living through those eras understood themselves as temporary. Dunkleosteus did not know the Devonian was nearing collapse. Mosasaurs moving through warm inland seas had no awareness that an asteroid already existed somewhere beyond Earth, traveling silently toward a future impact. Megalodon hunted whales across Miocene oceans without any concept that cooling seas and changing migration routes would eventually starve its lineage from existence. Every creature described throughout this long passage of time simply occupied the conditions available to it, surviving day by day inside worlds that must have appeared permanent from within. In this way, deep time alters the emotional scale through which the present is usually understood. Human history often feels enormous because human memory is short, yet against the backdrop of geological time, entire civilizations occupy less duration than a thin layer of sediment settling onto the seafloor. The prehistoric ocean reminds us that permanence has never been the defining quality of life on Earth. Persistence belongs not to particular species or ecosystems, but to the broader process itself, the endless reshaping of life into new forms capable of meeting altered conditions. There is a stillness that emerges from recognizing this, though not the stillness of certainty. It is something quieter and more difficult to describe. The awareness that every living system, no matter how advanced or powerful, exists within circumstances that remain temporary does not necessarily diminish the world. If anything, it sharpens the rarity of complexity itself. A reef becomes more extraordinary when understood as fragile. A predator becomes more remarkable when viewed as part of a lineage balanced against extinction for millions of years. Even survival gains a different meaning. Not permanence, not victory, but continuation for as long as conditions allow. Tonight, the modern ocean appears calmer than many of the vanished seas that preceded it. The giant marine reptiles are gone. The hyper-dense predator hierarchies of the Cretaceous no longer exist. Yet beneath the surface, especially in darkness far below the reach of sunlight, the descendants of survivors continue moving through ancient patterns, older than forests, mountains, or mammals themselves. They hunt, they evade, they reproduce, they endure, and surrounding them, as it always has, the ocean waits in immense silence, carrying within it both the memory of vanished worlds and the conditions from which whatever comes next will eventually emerge. Somewhere inside your body tonight are atoms that once moved through Cambrian tides beneath trilobites and Anomalocaris. Others drifted through Jurassic seas, dense with ammonites and marine reptiles. Others passed silently through the bodies of whales, sharks, coral reefs, plankton blooms, and extinct predators whose names survived only because fragments of their skeletons endured long enough to become stone. The deeper this history extends, the more difficult it becomes to separate the living present from the vanished ocean worlds that preceded it. The carbon within human cells has existed in continuous circulation through Earth systems for hundreds of millions of years. During the Cretaceous, it may have moved through warm atmospheric carbon dioxide above inland seas, crowded with mosasaurs. That same carbon could have been absorbed by microscopic plankton near the ocean surface, transferred upward through food webs into fish, ammonites, or marine reptiles, then buried after death within limestone sediment accumulating on an ancient seafloor. Tectonic movement later lifted portions of those sediments into continents. Rain and erosion released the minerals again. Plants absorbed them through roots. Animals consumed the plants. Across spans of time so large they almost resist comprehension, the same material continued changing form until eventually becoming part of a human nervous system capable of reflecting upon the process itself. The calcium inside human bones carries a similar history. Long before mammals existed, calcium circulated through shells, armor, and skeletons belonging to creatures now erased from the living world. It reinforced Cambrian exoskeletons lying beneath shallow seas. It formed the crushing jaw plates of Dunkleosteus. It strengthened the vertebrae of Pliosaurus and the massive skulls of mosasaurs. Entire reef systems rose from calcium carbonate, extracted slowly from seawater by organisms, building structure upon structure across geological time. During mass extinctions, shifting chemistry dissolved many of those structures back into the ocean again, returning their minerals to circulation. Nothing described throughout this history disappeared completely. The forms vanished, but the material remained. In the most literal sense possible, modern life is assembled from ancient oceans. This continuity changes the emotional texture of deep time. Prehistoric life can initially seem distant because the creatures involved are so unfamiliar, yet chemically there is no separation at all. The atoms now participating in human thought once existed within ecosystems older than trees, birds, flowers, or mammals. Matter passed continuously through extinction after extinction, surviving not as identity, but as transformation. Meanwhile, the ocean itself continued. It does not remember Anomalocaris, Dunkleosteus, Pliosaurus funkei, Livyatan, or Megalodon. Memory belongs to nervous systems, and nervous systems vanish quickly on geological scales. The sea operates differently. It circulates, it dissolves, it transports heat, salt, nutrients, sediment, and carbon across the surface of a changing planet. Ice ages arrive and retreat. Continents separate and collide. Species emerge, flourish briefly, and disappear. Through all of it, the ocean persists as process rather than observer. Tonight, that process is approximately 3.8 billion years old. The water moving through modern currents has outlasted every kingdom, every species, every reef, and every predator that ever entered it. Long after the last mosasaur surfaced through a Cretaceous inland sea, long after the final Megalodon vanished from a cooling Miocene ocean, the sea continued mixing their dissolved remains into future worlds. One day, it will do the same with us. Yet there is nothing especially tragic in that recognition. If anything, it places human existence back inside the wider continuity from which it emerged. Life on Earth was never separate from the ocean that produced it. The boundary between organism and environment has always been temporary, matter passing slowly between living bodies and planetary systems across immense spans of time. And beneath the darkness of the modern sea, far below ships, coastlines, and human light, that ancient system continues moving through itself exactly as it always has, building new forms from old material, carrying forward a story that remains unfinished, immense, and still largely unknown